Well, good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our May 23rd council meeting on this beautiful sunny day. Call the meeting to order, and first thing we need to do, of course, is to adopt the agenda as usual. I have a recommendation here that the agenda for the May 23rd regular meeting of council be accepted and passed. They moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Burke. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We'll move on to disclosure of pecuniary interest on anything on today's agenda. I have none to declare. Councillor Rankin?
None.
Councillor Hearn?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Councillor McCabe?
I have none.
And Councillor Burke?
Phone is up. Oh, thank you. Thank you. My microphone is working now, and I do in the public portion of the meeting for Shill Holdings.
Okay, in the public meeting regarding the I think there's a bylaw that deals with that too.
Yes,
So both in the public meeting and in the regular council meeting.
that's correct.
I just need you to say what your interest is.
I have an indirect pecuniary interest. My employer has done some work on that project.
Thank you. So now that we've got the niceties out of the way, we'll actually recess our regular council meeting to deal with the public meeting, to deal with some minor variances and zoning bylaw amendment public meetings. I have a recommendation here that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North recess the May 23rd, 2023 regular meeting of council at 7:02 p.m. for the purpose of holding a public meeting under the Planning Act for Nathan and Penny Troyer minor variance 5053745 Ontario Inc. minor variance 2763605 Ontario Inc. zoning bylaw amendment and Shill Land Holdings Inc. zoning bylaw amendment. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So we'll switch to the Committee of Adjustment agenda. And I'll call a Committee of Adjustment meeting to order and ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest on anything on this agenda. Again, this is application A02/23 for Nathan and Penny Troyer and A03/23 for 5053745 Ontario Inc. I have none to declare. Councillor Burke?
No,
Okay, Councillor McCabe?
I have none.
You, Councillor Hearn?
No.
Councillor Rankin?
I have none.
Okay, thank you. So we'll first deal with the minutes of the previous meeting. We have a recommendation here that the Committee of Adjustment meeting minutes of March 20th, 2023, application A01/23 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Rankin. Any questions or comments on those minutes? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Our first application is A02/23 for Nathan and Penny Troyer. The location of the subject property is described as Plan Mount Forest, North Clyde Street, Park Lot 2, Registered Plan 61R 22096, Part 2. The property is approximately 0.43 hectares in size. And the location of the property is shown on the map in your package. Purpose and effect of the application is to permit an existing accessory structure shed of 520 square feet on the subject lands prior to the construction of the principal building. Other variances may be considered where deemed appropriate. How is notice given for this public meeting?
Notice of mail to property owners within 60 meters as well to the applicable agencies, and signage was posted on the property on April 26, 2023.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank
Give
you.
us the rundown on this one, please.
Yes, for sure. So thank you, and through you, Chair. Before you today is a minor variance application to provide relief from section 6.1.5A of the zoning bylaw, which states that no accessory structure shall be established on a lot or a site until the main building has commenced construction. The applicants have received conditional approval of severance application B1421. The minor variance is a condition of that application. The applicant is proposing to retain an existing 520 square foot shed for personal use. And with that said, planning staff have no concerns with the application as the request is minor, meets the intent of the official plan and zoning bylaw. And I welcome any questions.
Thank you. We have some correspondence in your agenda package. Do we have any further correspondence received in this application?
No, we have had nothing further received.
Okay, thank you. Any persons wishing to be notified of the decision must submit a written request to the Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. And with that, I'll open the floor for any questions or comments from the applicant and or the public. Anybody wish to speak to this application? Do we have anyone? No.
Just make sure your microphone's on.
Okay,
Yeah.
left it on. Okay. Thank you for having us today. I'm Garnet Troyer. I'm Nathan's father, and it was my property that we severed off for them 2 years ago now, I guess. And the shed was, well, it was mine actually. And when we did the survey, we left it on the new property. And so it's been there for 15 years at least, probably more than that, but good sturdy building. We just do our winter accommodations in there, and so we'd like to just pass that on to the new property. And yeah, probably all that I need to say, unless there's any questions.
Thanks. We'll just open it up to council, and if we've got questions, we'll let you have at it again. Is there anyone else registered to speak on this application?
No, there's not.
Okay, so any questions or comments from committee members? Councillor Burke?
Yeah, I don't have a concern leaving the shed. I know it's not exactly how we do things in our policy, but I don't see the reason to tear down something that is usable and something that will probably be rebuilt if it has to be demolished now. So I'm okay with moving forward with the way the application is written.
So seeing no other questions or comments, we'll go to the decision. And the decision is that the minor variance applied for in application A02/23 for the property described as Plan Mount Forest, North Clyde Street, Park Lot 2, registered plan 61R 22096, Part 2, in the town of Mount Forest to provide the following relief. Number one, that the existing accessory structure be permitted to remain on site ahead of the construction of the main use, whereas the bylaw requires the construction of the main use ahead of the construction of an accessory structure. All those in favor? That's approved. Thank you. So that's on to the next step for you.
There you go. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next application. This is application A03/23 for 5053745 Ontario Inc. Location of the subject property in this case is described as Block 15, registered plan 61M-253, and is municipally known as 97-119 Jacks Way. The subject lands are approximately 0.31 hectares in size. Location of the property is shown on the map in your package. Purpose and effect of the application is to provide relief from the minimum lot area and minimum lot frontage requirements, facilitate the construction of a 12-unit townhouse development. The applicant is proposing to construct 12 townhouse units with a lot area of 208 square meters and a lot frontage of 6.2 meters. Other variances may be considered where deemed appropriate. How was notice given for this public meeting?
Meters of the property and the spelling of the applicable agencies. Signage was posted on the property on May 3rd, 2023.
Thank you. Matthew, over to you.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, before you today is a minor variance application to provide relief from the minimum lot area and minimum frontage requirements for a 12-unit street townhouse development. The applicant is proposing townhouse dwellings with a lot area of 2,239 square feet and frontage of approximately 20.3 feet. With that said, planning staff have no concerns with the application as the request is minor, meets the intent of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have some correspondence in your agenda. Do we have anything further in terms of correspondence?
No, nothing's been received since the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Any persons wishing to be notified of the decision must submit a written request to the Secretary Treasurer of the Committee of Adjustment. And with that, I'll open the floor for any questions or comments from the applicant and or the public. I see my agenda says Brad Wilson is attending virtually to did you wish to speak to this application, Brad?
Hello, everybody. No, I don't believe I need to say anything on it unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you. Anyone
Thank
else registered to speak on this application?
No.
Okay, anyone else present who wishes to speak to this application? Okay, then I'll open the floor up to questions or comments from the committee. Not seeing any, we'll move to the decision here. And that is as follows, that the minor variance applied for in application A03/23 for the property described as block 15, registered plan 61M-253 and municipally known as 97 to 119 Jacks Way in the town of Mount Forest, provide the following relief. Number one, that a reduced minimum lot area of 208 square meters per dwelling be permitted for a proposed 12-unit townhouse development, whereas the bylaw requires 232 square meters per dwelling. And number two, that a reduced minimum lot frontage of 6.2 meters per dwelling be permitted for a proposed 12-unit townhouse development, whereas the bylaw requires 6.5 meters per dwelling. All those in favor? That's approved. Thank you. So that completes our Committee of Adjustment agenda. So we'll adjourn the Committee of Adjustment. And the recommendation here that the Committee of Adjustment meeting of May 23rd, 2023 be adjourned at 7:12 p.m. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor Hearn. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Some logistics. Adam, I know you're waiting in the waiting room. I've tried to promote you to panelists, Sherry, Tony. I've tried to promote you. Your item is up on the agenda. And if you'd like to speak with it, you're going to have to be promoted into the meeting. So I will try again to promote you into the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So we'll get started with the public meeting. I'll call the public meeting to order. And we'll go through the disclosure of pecuniary interest again for this one. So we have two applications, zoning bylaw amendment 25/22 for 2763605 Ontario Inc. And zoning bylaw amendment 05/23 for Shill Land Holdings Inc. I have no pecuniary interest to declare. Councillor Rankin,
I don't have, pardon me, I don't have any.
Councillor Hearn,
I do not.
Councillor McCabe,
I have none.
and Councillor Burke.
Yes, as previously stated, 05/23 Shill Land Holdings, I have an indirect pecuniary interest.
Okay, so we'll deal with the first application and then when we come to that one. Okay, the owner applicant in this case is 2763605 Ontario Inc. And the location of the subject land. The land subject to the proposed amendment is described as concession 5. Part lot 28, part lot 29 is municipally known as 7514 Wellington Road 109, geographic township of Arthur. The property subject to the proposed amendment is approximately 34.8 hectares in size and is shown on the map in your package. The proposed amendment will revise the site-specific zoning A-13 on the subject lands to permit an expansion of the existing abattoir facility. The current zoning permits a licensed abattoir facility on 0.4 hectares portion of the subject lands. The applicants are proposing to expand the abattoir facility lot area to 0.8 hectares in size, and additional relief may be considered at this meeting. How was notice given for this public meeting?
Notices were mailed to property owners within 120 meters of the property and to the applicable agencies. Signage was posted on the property on April 26, 2023.
Thank you, Matthew, and back over to you.
Yes, and thank you. And through you, Chair, before you today is a zoning bylaw amendment seeking to rezone approximately an acre portion of the subject lands from agricultural to agricultural site specific A-13. The applicant is seeking the aforementioned amendment to facilitate an expansion of an existing abattoir use. There's an existing 18,700 square foot abattoir on subject lands, and the applicants are proposing an approximate 25,000 square foot addition in terms of office space and as well to expand the use of the abattoir on the subject lands. So all in all, the application conforms to the zoning bylaw, the official plan, and provincial policy, and planning staff have no concerns with the application.
Thank you. So we have the correspondence from the Grand River Conservation Authority. Has any further correspondence been received in respect to this application?
No, there has not been any.
Okay, thank you. Anyone requesting a notice of the decision of the bylaw will be considered at the regular council meeting following the public meeting. Persons wishing notice of the passing of the bylaw must submit a written request. And with that, I'll open the floor for any questions or comments from the applicant and or the public. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak to this application? Certainly, if you come to the podium, please.
Did you leave the microphone on? Pat?
Oh, yes.
And if you could just state your name for the record, please.
Hi, so my name is Sebastian Altina from Arthur. Yeah, so I'm a poultry producer near the proposed expansion site. And yeah, the only real concern is just with the biosecurity in the area with them wanting to double in size. You almost wonder how big this abattoir is going to get, and maybe if it should be better suited in the industrial area. Just being as that this area is fairly poultry like intense and that, and some of you guys might know, like we've really been struggling with like avian influenza the last couple of years, and it's quite a big risk to our business. And with all the different birds coming in from different properties, I feel that the poultry farms in the area will be at higher risk to, you know, disease. Like AI is the big one right now, and different diseases moving forward as well. So it's just something to consider, like just a concern that we have. And I know a few other producers in the area were a little concerned as well. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to this application? Do we have the applicant with us? So I see the Azizes. Are they
They're-
panelists?
Yeah, they're in as panelists now. Sherry, Tony, Samir, or Adam.
Do any of you wish to speak to the application? Tony, I see you unmuting yourself.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think we all in the poultry industry share concerns about AI, as the previous speaker just mentioned. And, you know, we're all adhering to preventions in terms of biosecurity. With regards to the increase in size, I will say that part of the reason for the expansion is to allow us to do more packaging of the materials. Currently within the existing facility, there's absolutely no room for packaging. So it's an abattoir. It's the birds go through the abattoir and they go straight to the cooler. We would like to add value added services like packaging to get it into the marketplace based on what customers are asking for. So while there will be a small increase in terms of the amount of birds coming in, that won't be substantial. A big part of what we're trying to achieve here with the expansion is to do further processing and packaging of the existing raw materials.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to this application? Okay, I'll open it up for any questions or comments from council. Councilor McKay.
I guess I have one, and through you, Mayor. I guess what kind of measures will be taken to mitigate any possible influenza biosecurity transfer? Not that they don't have any in place right now, but just to address a local producer's concerns. Are there any more measures going to be put in place? I guess, Tony, that question is for you.
Oh, I see Adam's unmuted now.
Or Adam or whoever.
Is somebody able to help us with that?
Want me to repeat it or?
No, just hang
Oh,
on.
sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as part of the expansion plan and that sort of thing, the plant will be upgraded as from its current provincial licensing to federal license. And with that comes an expansion of the food safety program, animal welfare program, as well the biosecurity program. So all of that is being taken into consideration and will be bolstered and upgraded in order to comply with the federal regulations. So there will be an increase and more measures taken toward biosecurity in order to comply with CFI regulations, as the plant is currently governed by OMAFRA.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I think, we often talk about not wanting to use agricultural land for other uses. The biosecurity issue certainly is a very poignant one today, but I do think this is a good use of agricultural land for this purpose. It's not really a compatible use with many neighborhoods and so on. So this is a great use of this property, and glad to see the additional investment in that property and to allow that to be a viable business for the long term. So thanks for your application, and good luck with the project. Anything further from council? Okay, so we will be dealing with the bylaw following this public meeting related to this application, so stay tuned. Our next owner applicant is Shillland Holdings, Inc. This is zoning bylaw amendment 05/23. And the location of the subject lands, the land subject to the proposed amendment is described as concession 3, part lot 14, part lot 15, with a civic address of 9088, concession 2. The subject property is approximately 61.47 hectares in size. The location is shown on the map attached. Purpose and effect of the proposed amendment is to rezone the subject lands from agricultural A zone to site-specific agricultural A2 zone. This application is seeking to rezone the retained agricultural portion of the property to prohibit any future residential development. This rezoning is a condition of severance application B147/22 that was granted provisional approval by the Wellington County Land Division Committee. The consent will sever 0.77 hectares rural residential parcel with an existing dwelling and a drive shed. A 60.7 hectare vacant agricultural parcel will be retained. Additional relief may be considered at this meeting. How was notice given for this public meeting?
Notices were mailed to property owners within 120 meters, as well as to the applicable agencies, and signage was posted on the property on April 26, 2023.
Great, thank you. Matthew?
Perfect. And through you, Chair, before you today is a zoning bylaw amendment seeking to rezone the subject lands from agricultural to agricultural site specific. The applicant, as mentioned, received conditional approval on severance application B147/2022 under the surplus farm dwelling policies. Under these policies, a standard condition is placed to rezone the retained lands to prohibit any future residential. Additionally, the applicant is seeking relief to recognize an existing 2,080 square foot accessory structure on the severed rural residential property. All in all, the application conforms to the zoning bylaw, the official plan, as well as provincial policy, and planning staff have no concerns.
Great, thank you. We have the correspondence from Grand River Conservation Authority. Do we have any further correspondence in respect to this application?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. The bylaw will be considered at the regular council meeting following this public meeting. Persons wishing notice of the passing of the bylaw must submit a written request. And with that, I'll open the floor for any questions or comments from the applicant and or the public. Do we have anyone registered to speak on this application?
We do not.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Are you here? No.
Okay. Not seeing anybody to do that, we'll open it up for questions or comments from council. Okay. So we will be dealing with the bylaw following this meeting, so we'll adjourn the public meeting. You want to come back for that, Sherry? So we have a recommendation here that the public meeting of May 23rd, 2023 be adjourned at 7:25 PM. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Burke. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. That completes the public meeting. We'll switch back to our regular council agenda now. So we'll resume our regular council meeting, and the recommendation to do that is that the council of the corporation of the Township of Wellington North resume the May 23rd, 2023 regular meeting of council at 7:26 PM. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Rankin and Councillor Hearn. Thank you. All those in favor? That's carried. So we'll deal with the first bylaw coming out of the public meeting. And recommendation is that bylaw number 37-23 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 66-01, being a zoning bylaw for the Township of Wellington North, be read a first, second, and third time and enacted. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Hearn. Any questions, comments? All those in favor? It's carried. Move on to the next one. And we have a recommendation here that bylaw number 38-23 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 66-01 being a zoning bylaw for the Township of Wellington North, be read a first, second, and third time and enacted. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. Any questions, comments on that one? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to presentations. So we have a few today. First up, we have Robin Ross, our Public School Board trustee. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you. So I know you already gave the schools money for their playgrounds. And it's great that municipalities support the schools. I'm going to keep asking everybody to think about it a little bit differently, because playgrounds are actually very detrimental economically to our schools. For example, Westfield in North Perth is less than 20 years old, and they now have to raise over $300,000 to replace the playground that's less than 20 years old. Small schools around here can fundraise for decades and not get enough money to put in a playground. So, for example, I don't know if anybody can answer this or not, but in the municipality, what kind of time frame are your playgrounds officially closed and nobody can use them in a year? Because school board ones, if I'm being really generous, are only open for about 80 days, and out of those 80 days, at most 80 minutes in a day. So if you think about it, all this money for very pretty metal posts cemented into the ground is only being used about 1 day out of 365. We're not in an area with an overabundance of resources. So what I am trying to, and I've talked to school councils, didn't make it to Kenilworth and Arth yet, but I have talked to like Minnow Clifford and Palmerston, stuff like that, because everybody thinks we need more playgrounds. And it's very ineffective in creating what students can use, because they are only open Monday to Friday. They're not supposed to be used after school hours. Kids are not outside on them all day. Most schools only have the 2 40-minute breaks. So my son, who is a ninja, at most gets to use it from when school starts until the middle of October for 20 minutes because the school is so big, he can't, he's not allowed to access it both recesses, just one. And I don't think people understand that when they get excited about the big shiny playgrounds and stuff like that. So when you look at the cost that's involved in putting a playground in our schools, there's a lot of other things we could do for our students with those funds. For example, I personally would fundraise and assist every student in an individual school in getting a membership into something they love. If it's an art camp, or it's a sports, or it's a help you play, go to skating, clubs, anything like that, because there's a lot of students that can't do that. And as well, the insurance for school board playgrounds, they are very much encouraging us with their fees to not have playgrounds. Comparatively, and I don't know the exact figures, municipalities get a significantly better insurance rate than school boards do for having a playground. And which is why the cost of repairs are astronomical. So what we do when we put in a new playground is we are saying that in 5 years, you're going to have to fundraise another $40,000 to repair it and maintain it. And then in 10 years, you're going to have to fundraise $80,000 to repair and maintain it. The provincial or the Ministry of Education does not give any money for playgrounds. Just like when you talk about the local hospitals, the Ministry of Health doesn't put the equipment in the hospitals, which is why we have a lot of fundraisers for our hospitals to buy like the ultrasounds and stuff for the emergency departments and things like that. The funding for schools never goes into playgrounds. So Upper Grand is trying to look at it from a different way, because from an equity standpoint, the small schools, which tend to be my North Wellington schools compared to like Guelph. So for example, Aberfoyle got a $250,000 or massive amount of donation and a brand new playground. Kenilworth is never getting that because we don't have that huge industry sitting right beside to give them that. And if Kenilworth does have that type of playground, they will not be able to fundraise for anything except to maintain it and hopefully maintain it. Because the standards to keep that playground up to a standard that allows us to keep it open is extremely high. So looking at different options, because the municipality has playgrounds already. If we spent the money on having more crossing guards so that students can access those during the school year, or the Upper Grand is very happy to talk to municipalities and say, hey, we'll give you the land if you want to add a playground or work with us on something. But as small school communities, it's a no-win game to put in playgrounds, when at the same time, we can't pay for a lot of field trips either. So for example, my son has no idea how to cross the street in the city. He doesn't know how to get on a bus in the city. He doesn't know how to watch for traffic in parking lots. Those are like, if you took money from the fundraising and said, okay, we're going to spend $10,000 and we're going to have these different field trips that our kids have never been to. Like, we'll go to St. Jacobs, get on the Ion train, show them how to pay for their ticket, run, like you have to plan your schedule, you have to get back. Those are skills and experiences that they're not getting generally, but we could be using the money to do that instead of putting pretty painted cement posts or metal posts cemented into the ground. And my son is violently opposed to my opinion because he wants to play. But when I'm looking at it from a return on investment, as somebody who has to look at a school budget and a whole school system budget where every penny has to be accounted for to the ministry, that type of spending for something that is not used all day long by every student is really not the most efficient way to spend our money. So what I am encouraging school councils and stuff to do is to have more conversations and say, what can we do differently with the local municipalities? So for example, Kenilworth does not have anywhere nearby that they could go to, but Arthur is not significantly far away from the pool area where you guys have playgrounds. Palmerston Public is fundraising for a new playground. They've been fundraising for 17 years for their new playground. And it is a block and a half away from the massive Lions Park in the middle of Palmerston. So both the municipality and the school are both asking citizens to raise a lot of money to put services almost beside each other that are very expensive to run. Growing up in Canada, Ontario, you don't have to be a figure skater or a hockey player, but having the chance to take figure or any basic skating lessons is something that a lot of kids can't afford. So if we take our fundraising money and say every kid in the school is going to have an opportunity to have a helmet and skates and have a chance to get skating lessons once a year, because you can go skating with your friends that way. You don't have to have, like right now, I only know because it's my son's school, he gets to go skating twice a year with friends. And for some of the kids, that's only time they get to skate because they're not in hockey and ringette and stuff like that. So for example, you could have flag football at every school in North Wellington for less than what schools are asking for help to raise their, to put their playground in. Every single kid could play. We could put more greenhouses on the schools for kids to grow their own food and understand the agricultural community they live in. I personally would love to have a drone camp because drones are becoming more and more a part of the agricultural community. And we have kids that would be awesome at it, but we don't have that opportunity for them because we're spending money on other things. So is it wrong to support playgrounds? No, kids love them and kids will always want to be on them. I'm just asking people to think, is there another way we could spend this money that maybe does more? Because we have very finite resources. So when people come and ask you for the money, it's a big decision to say, how can we fit this into our budget? What do we have to change and stuff like that? School board can't even look at it. The playgrounds are not something we ever look at. If we got more money, we would put more resources in the classroom for kids than in a playground. So hopefully, I know there's a bunch of my friends that are like, I can't believe you're against playgrounds. I'm not against playgrounds. I'm against spending very limited funds on something that doesn't get used that much. I like playgrounds, but I want to think about it in the context in which it's used and how we can get the most money for our local schools. So if anybody has any questions, I know I'm like the Grinch of playgrounds, but I really hope that people start to think of different ways to spend very big amounts of money. So.
Thanks, Robin. Anybody have any questions? Councillor Burke?
Yes, I do, through you, Mayor Lennox. So Robin, thank you very much for your presentation. And I couldn't agree with you more in the fact that students should learn life skills. I think that's very important. My question is that the school boards deem the playgrounds unsafe.
They have to be, so Ministry of Education has, and our insurance companies have rules about the inspections and who can do them. And once they hit a checkpoint, it's not technically the school board saying they're unsafe. It's the testing, I guess, the inspection company that says that, and then gives us the report, and then it goes to the schools.
Right. So the school board.
Okay, yes.
Deems the playgrounds unsafe through your measures and policies that are in place. And you mentioned that students get 2 40-minute breaks. So what does the school board expect those students to do in those 2 40-minute breaks if there are no playgrounds? What kind of activities are those students to do then?
So, well, there's limits to how many kids can be on the playground. So for example, and so Palmerston Public is really cramped. So grades K-3 have the first break and then the rest have it afterwards. And depending on your class, you don't get your time. You only get like one time a day, depending on how many kids. And it depends on each school because there's only so many allowed in the zone. And then, so we have the basketball nets that have to be, and we have soccer fields, and we have baseball fields, and we have all the equipment for that. We also have the opportunity to put more outdoor play spaces, which don't involve the metal built in, but like, I don't know if you've ever driven through Newry with Atwood that has the huge hill. If my son gets a choice in the winter, he's playing with the snow mound because that is more exciting than the other stuff. There's a vast amount of toys and games and equipment that we don't buy because we can't afford it, which school council generally try to buy, as well as the chances to go on trips. For example, there's a company that comes in and does rock climbing. It costs a lot of money, but for a week, kids get to do this rock climbing in the gym. If you got to do that 3 times a year, that would be a lot more exciting than once every 3 years. So is there an absolutely perfect? No, but I'm just asking people to think about it.
And I just have one more follow-up question.
Go ahead,
So
Councilor.
my follow-up question would be, you made a comment about the land and the fact that the municipality has considered or as promised funds for the playground equipment. The interesting part that I found was that the school board would be potentially interested in selling some of that land to incorporate a playground.
The school board is absolutely interested in talking to municipalities about different ways to do this.
Yeah, because
Where,
I find specifically here at the Kenilworth location with the residential development that is being built in and up around the school, I find that a very interesting opportunity.
because technically, no one's supposed to be on school board property after 3:15. So no kid is supposed to be on any of the playground equipment in Upper Grand District School Board after school hours. So if you see a kid on it after 3:15, they're trespassing. And did we enforce that? No. Are we chasing children down? No. But from an insurance perspective, and insurance tends to run the world with their rules, nobody's supposed to be touching that equipment. And so yes, if any type of interesting ideas on how to work together, the school board is definitely interested in doing that. Because we want to be more combined with municipalities and county, and not such a separate, because especially in the smaller areas, replicating the same thing a few blocks away is not efficient for either group. So. Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Rankin?
Thank you, Mayor. Hello. You had mentioned that the vast amount of money that is required to keep the playground operational. And if you didn't have that, and as Councillor Burke was saying, you would have to find some other means of having the children do their exercise when they're out on the playground. It's for their mental wellness that they do have to get out every day. It's not going to be a matter of just taking 1 or 2 trips a year to do something else in placement of that. And then you have the problem with if you have other activities that may need to be planned, are the teachers going to be willing to add that to their list of duties to be able to make sure that there are planned activities for the children so that they are active when they're out on the playground?
So everything is viable if you find people that want to do it. So if I approach one school and there's a teacher who is thrilled about a specific thing, that thing will happen. So for example, if you just looking at Norwell, they have a spectacular theater because they have a teacher who puts a lot of her time and energy into that. Whereas if you do not have that type of person interested in it, that doesn't happen. So when you were looking at children being active, I would like to see information that shows me that a playground is where they're getting their cardio and their flexibility and stuff like that. Because it is a very limited time frame and there's a very limited number of kids that can be on it in a day. But if we look at it for more, if you're looking for more general, having a space where bigger groups can do things together, like more music outside for dance, more like pickleball is a massive thing. Kids can play pickleball, but we have none of that equipment for them. So it's really, and each school is different. Maryborough has 3 classes worth of snowshoes that anybody can use at any time. And Drayton and Center Peel have skates for everybody in the school and helmets, because that's something that's of interest in that area. So individual schools are driven by the kind of interest within that. And that's what you work with. Because me saying to each school, you have to do this thing is not very helpful, because it won't sustain itself. But what you do ask is, for example, I coach a lot of sports. I coach a lot of broomball and hockey, and I personally would spend a lot of my free time supporting a broomball program in schools in this area, not as trustee, but as a mom that volunteers and loves the game. I would spend a lot of time in schools letting kids learn how to do that if there was equipment available to do that, because it's a significantly cheaper sport and it's more inclusive than hockey. So if you're asking me for an exact thing that would make everybody move all the time, I don't have that. And as far as staffing goes, staff are only required as supervisors. It doesn't mean they have to run the program. We have other things that are run by like Big Brothers and Big Sisters have programs in the schools that are not run by staff, because that organization goes in and does the work. They're supported by staff within the school, but it's not organized and run by it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Robin. You also mentioned community efforts with different organizations. And I know in the past, groups such as Guides and Scouts have had trouble being able to have meetings in a school.
Yes.
Because it's a custodial matter with them having to spend extra time.
Yep.
And according to the report that we're going to be listening to shortly, there's a lot of groups that are not being able to use a school, that could use a school. There's space in the school, there's time in the school schedule that they could be using it instead of scrambling, trying to find some place to do their meetings.
Yep. Well, that's the main reason I ran 5 years ago, because I was in a community group that was paying close to $600 a year to have meetings in the school, to buy resources for the school. And I thought that was crazy. So community use is defined by the Ministry of Education. And then from that, the Upper Grand District School Board has to follow their rules. COVID definitely messed up a lot of the access to the schools, but there's also a lot of ways that to me personally, it felt like I was trying to invade something like my own house, because I have to fill out these forms, and every time I fill out a form, there's this much fee to fill out the form to want to schedule a thing. And then, but I'm like, I live here. Like, why can't I have a meeting in here to give money to the school? It's costing me money to give money to the school. That doesn't make sense. So there are big barriers to that. And I need more people to talk about it so that we can say, how can we change this? Because it's not just at the school board, it's also ministry driven. So I totally agree that it is hard to get a meeting in a school. Sorry.
Be great. No, I would think it'd be great if you could work on that and allow other groups to be able to utilize the school.
Yes,
And continue.
Go ahead.
we just have to change Ministry of Education rules.
Also, you were mentioning about being able to take the students to other activities off-site
Yeah.
in place of having the playground. We have a project that we want to get off the ground, a pool for Mount Forest. Is there any way that the money that might be spent on playgrounds could be utilized to have students take swimming lessons and have it as a credit in the school towards their physical education?
Yes, people have to just do the work to have that sorted out. It has to, the municipality has to say to the school board, we have this opportunity. What can you work together with us to create? So programming is driven by how many students sign up. So especially in our smaller schools, and it's all based on like teacher contracts, you have to have this many students per class in different grades and stuff like that. If you want a new program to come to, say, Wellington Heights in high school, you have to have enough students to fill a section. And if you don't have enough students to fill a section, sections are how the ministry funding is allocated for teachers. So it basically, you have to kind of think of it as a business. And the more people want to take a course, the more viable that course is, because the more students you have in the school, in that class, the better you can justify it. So looking ahead, if you want to talk to the school board about how can we have more swimming for our students in this area, then you absolutely have those discussions with the school board. I'm not allowed to make that choice. So you got to go and talk to like the director, and because operations is very separate from what I do. I go around and I ask a lot of questions until people ask me to go away. And then I get some answers and I can share them with people in this area. But programming is driven by different areas and what they have to offer. So if Wellington North says, we have a pool with this much time, like Norwell has a hockey program. You could have a swimming program in Mount Forest. You have to create that so you talk to this Principal Block at Wellington Heights is a phenomenal guy. I would start with him and say, this is what we have. What can we work with you to create for students in this area?
Sorry, what did you say his name was?
Principal Block, Brent Block, yeah. And he is always working with different community groups to try to improve access to different programming for his students.
Sorry, I just have one more. Wellington Heights has a tennis court off to the side. And I
Yes,
think twice in I don't know how many years that I've only ever seen people using it. I'm just wondering, is there any way that can be utilized as for the community as well as for the high school?
yes. So you start with Principal Block again, because what he does is he says, these are the resources I have in my school. And I have an opportunity to work with Wellington North Council, and he can create a proposal to go to this, to the director or executive superintendents and say, this is what we would like to talk about adding to Wellington Heights. And through, like, as long as nobody talks to each other, nothing ever happens. So there might be some rule somewhere that says absolutely never, ever can somebody play tennis. I don't think there is one, but there might be one somewhere. But you'll at least find out. I'd never want to see, like, I've asked about how can public, like, if we don't have a gym in town, how can the public use the gym in the school? Because that generates revenue for the gym, for the school. And schools are, so the money we get for each student covers in class. Anything else, we have to find somewhere else. So if we have a partnership with the community that brings more money into the school, that is a benefit. Same thing with international students. If we can find more people that are willing to host international students, that brings more money to all of our local schools. Our schools do not have much money compared to schools with significantly bigger populations. It is exactly given for the number of students in the class. So like Kenilworth is never, ever going to get the money for even books that a public school in Guelph will. And it's because ministry funding is very specific. This one student equals this, one student equals this, one student equals this. And changing, the only way to get more of that is to have more students to take things.
I'm sorry, to get back to the tennis court again,
Yeah.
you had mentioned that at an elementary school, the children aren't allowed to use the playground equipment after 3:15. Is that a regulation like that with the tennis court, with it being at a high school?
So tennis courts, if you have an agreement with the municipality, would be different. There are agreements like that in Guelph. There just haven't been any around here. So if the municipality works with the school board to create a relationship where it is open to the public, and it could be, the rules could be like from 3:45 until 9 at night, it's municipal use. And during it from 9 in the morning till whatever, it's school use. That's how it works. But it has to be something that both sides try to find a way to work.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any more. So thanks, Robin, for taking the time to come and talk to us tonight.
That's okay. I'm sure I'm gonna get emails from people saying, oh, you're against playgrounds again. But and it's okay for me to be wrong. I just want people to think about it. I am in transition. My son is starting his lacrosse game in Durham right now. So but I believe that there are questions about LTAP, the long term. Is she still here, Dad? Yes. Yes. Because she definitely doesn't want me to make stuff up. So she is the one to answer any questions about the long-term accommodation plans.
That's if someone pulls up this.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have it? Okay. So I'm gonna go to lacrosse, and then unless everybody has a.
No, that's great.
Okay.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have another presentation. We have Dr. Wayne Caldwell to join us talking about some proposed changes in provincial planning policy. There he is. Welcome to our council meeting, Professor Caldwell. This is certainly a hot topic in our community, so glad you could join us to share some wisdom with us.
Well, thanks very much to you and to council for your interest in the topic. I think it is as fundamental as it gets in terms of impacts on rural communities and on agriculture in particular. And it's led me to get engaged in a way that has actually, this is, I think, day 16 of retirement for me. And this is about the 12th presentation I've made on this topic. So there's so much interest amongst the farm community, amongst municipalities, amongst interest groups of various sorts and sizes. Because they see, again, that we're talking about the future of Ontario, we're talking about the future of rural communities, we're talking about the future of North Wellington. And hopefully my comments will be of assistance to you. I have a slide deck that I'll share with you. So let me just go there. And trust everyone can see that okay. And assuming that be the case, let me just begin with a little bit of a story because it takes me back in time. I've spent much of my career working with municipalities. I worked with the County of Huron for 20 years plus and have been at the university a similar length of time, notwithstanding the just retirement side of things. And one of my first planning projects was working with the Township of East Wawanosh. And some of you will remember that prior to amalgamation, now part of North Huron. And it was a process of developing a new official plan for the municipality. And we went through a process of running public meetings where we talked about agriculture, we talked about natural environment, we talked about aggregate resources, the small communities and so on. And at the back of the room for each of these public meetings was a large stereotypical burly farmer. And he liked to heckle. He liked to ask really tough questions. He would stand up in the middle of my presentations and so on and so forth. And as we went through these meetings, I felt a little bit smaller with each successive meeting, but we got through the public phase of the workshops. And we went away and we sat down with the local council, yourselves, for example, and we hammered out the policies that would go into the official plan. And we go back to a final public meeting. And my friend, the big burly farmer's still at the back of the room, but this time he's not standing up. He's not heckling. He's not asking questions. And I'm thinking he's so angry, he's going to meet me out in the parking lot. But we got through the meeting, and finally at the end, he stands up and he puts his hand on the table and he says, "This is a good plan. You listen to what we had to say." Now, there's a lesson there for us all in terms of listening and acting on people's wishes and doing the best we can. But there was a story behind the story. The story behind the story is in that municipality, prior to their new official plan, they had allowed surplus residences to be severed. And there was an individual, an accountant actually by training, who met all of the qualifications of being a farmer in terms of the legal standard the municipality had set. And he was buying up farms, and he was going around and he was severing off the house as a surplus residence, and then he was selling the farmland. And he'd done this 6 or 7 times, and the farm community in that municipality was so upset that they said, "We don't want any severances of a residential nature except in the towns and villages permitted in our municipality." And council lived by that statement. And given their anger, I think it's interesting to reflect that today we're talking about a situation with the proposed policy changes that would allow literally hundreds of thousands of these to occur in rural Ontario. And these kinds of issues, I think, will permeate planning and permeate municipalities and agriculture in ways that we've not even started to think of. So let me share with you some more details and just again cover a little bit of the basic, just to make sure everybody's aware of what we're talking about. That released on April the 6th, 2023 was the proposed provincial planning statement. Now there's much included within the legislation and within the changes. And my expertise is primarily around the impact of severances in rural communities. So that's what I'll primarily speak to. There's an opportunity to submit comments up to the 5th of June, and lots of municipalities are doing so. And again, it merges the provincial planning or policy statement with the places to grow document, which will have less relevance depending upon where you are in the province. And again, it's intended to contribute to the government's goal of seeing 1.5 million new homes created over the next 10 years. And it's anticipated that this would be in effect in the fall of 2023. We'll see what it looks like at that point in time. So that's just sort of the background, but let me take you into some more of the specifics. And I hope everyone can see this. There's a lot of stuff here. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have the existing provincial policy statement. On the right-hand side, we have the proposal. And in particular, it speaks to residential lot creation, and the arrows are what I'm going to speak to in particular. Residential lot creation in prime agricultural areas is only permitted in accordance with provincial guidance. And it goes on to say, point number 2 indicates that new residential lots may be created. The total number of lots created from a lot or parcel of land as it exists on January the 1st, 2023 does not exceed 3. So it's saying that on a farm parcel, and it's really important to emphasize that part, it's a lot or farm parcel or parcel of land. So we're talking about a farmer who might own multiple parcels of land. We're talking about a non-farmer who might own a farm parcel of land being eligible for this. Going to the bottom of the page, there's another part that I think is really, in my view, problematic. Official plans and zoning bylaws shall not contain provisions that are more restrictive than the policy above, except to address public health or safety concerns. So it's saying that in those parts of the province which might have the most to lose in terms of an intensive livestock industry, as an example, they too are going to be forced to allow this number of severances per parcel. Going on to the next phase, and I'll also point out, and some of this particular one has some merits and some benefits, but subordinate to the principal dwelling, up to 2 additional residential units may be permitted in prime agricultural areas, and it goes on to list some criteria. What's of interest there is, I think that has value for some existing farms, but we're also saying all of these new parcels that are created may also potentially have 2 dwellings on it. So you're multiplying the impact by 3 times, notwithstanding this number of severances that might be created. Let me get into some more details. So this is just, again, a bit of background, the number of farms in Ontario, but we anticipate or expect to predict there's roughly 170,000 parcels. And that number comes from farm credit. It speaks to the number of parcels that benefit from the, I always get the name of it wrong, the farm tax rebate program, the farms that can be enrolled for that taxation approach. There's roughly 170,000 parcels. So Those, in my view, as a minimum, would be eligible for these potential severances at 3 acres apiece. I think that's way on the low side in terms of average acreage. That in its own right would take out potentially 510,000 acres out of production. I think the overall impact, though, is much, much greater. And for North Wellington, with your intensive livestock sector, you'll have an appreciation of MDS as an example, and what it might mean for farmers wanting to establish or expand livestock facilities when they're potentially looking at the restrictions that would come with that number of residents potentially located there. Total acreage of land in farmland is identified there from the census, but also to add, not only will this policy lead to the loss of farmland, it will in many ways impact other things, ranging from impacts on land values to safety on roads. I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit here. To trespass, to concerns over manure application, et cetera. I thought it was really interesting listening to your application beforehand where someone was wanting to expand an abattoir. And likewise, you had a farmer trying to think of, well, what's my interest in this application? And I think both of those are incredibly compromised by the number of neighbors that could potentially locate in proximity to them. We have the amount of land in Ontario that's prime agricultural land, it's limited. And according to the Ontario Farmland Trust, we're losing already 319 acres of farmland per day. And again, that I think sets the context. I don't need to tell you folks how important livestock production is in Ontario, but there's other forms of production. I often speak to this topic from the point of view of what it might mean through MDS for hog, dairy, poultry, et cetera. But keeping in mind that we also have significant cash crop production, and I was in Hearn and Perth all the time, but just driving through Perth, well, folks were in the midst of really going at it in terms of getting crops. Thinking of the large equipment going down the highways, the manure that was being applied on that particular day, the sprays that were being applied, and thinking, what does it mean again to have all of these additional residences potentially located in a county or region, which has in fact discouraged that kind of activity over the last 50 years. So I put this slide in, and I'm going to just expand upon this a little bit, just to make sure people are seeing what we're potentially looking at. In this instance, this is historic. This is a situation from Wellington County where we've got 6 lots that were created. And I initially identified this photo as something just to give people a sense of what could potentially occur in terms of the landscape could look like after the fact. But as I reflected in this, and hopefully your CAO will forgive me for adding one new slide, and the one new slide I have is the next one. And it takes this slide and says, oh, actually, it's not this, it's what it would look like after this. So in this particular instance, I'm thinking that that potentially represents 4 parcels. And again, you can see the new lines I put there where it's divided down the highway, and it impresses me that it could be 4 parcels. Whether it is or is not all that relevant. What it looks like though, after the policy were implemented, when it changes from those 6 lots to 18 lots. And I even would wonder, what does it mean for this large lot here in terms of someone potentially arguing that there's some agricultural use connected to that? And again, it starts to give a sense, well, you as councillors might start to think, well, that's not 6 lots in the country, that's a small hamlet. And what does that mean in terms of servicing? What does it mean in terms of agriculture? What does it mean in terms of the impacts and so on? And again, we'll get into a few more of those specific details. So I normally do my research. I teach my students. I, do conference presentations. I don't engage myself a whole lot in social media. But in this instance, I felt so strongly about it in terms of what it would mean for the future of this province and for rural Ontario that I released a series of tweets which have gained a fair bit of attention. So I'm going to take you through them, starting in the bottom right. And it's really, this is the first one I put out back in mid-April. The proposed new provincial policy statement will force municipalities to allow up to 3 new residential lots per farm parcel and 2 accessory residential units on each of these new parcels. This is a radical shift of planning for agriculture in Ontario. Radical, and I don't mean by that in a positive way. The one above that is in the 1970s, Ontario released countryside planning foodland guidelines. These were 2 documents that were in effect, both championed agriculture over residential sprawl, variations of this guided planning for 50 years, and the new PPS introduces much uncertainty for the future of Ontario agriculture. What I think is really important and to reflect on is the PPS, the original countryside planning and original foodland guidelines, which led to the PPS, were released by the Bill Davis Tory government and were subsequently adopted by every government in one way or the other. They changed, the pendulum would swing back and forth, but the essential notion of protecting agriculture over residential sprawl was always there. One above that, while Greenbelt changes cause much concern, the province's proposed new PPS ag severance policy is in many ways, in my view, many times worse. And I would say if I had more characters with Twitter, I would have said much, much worse. It would allow hundreds of thousands of new lots and many residences scattered amongst farms. And again, how will agriculture cope in that reality? And the top one there, on a typical concession block, the proposed new PPS will allow at least 30 new residential lots. With MDS in the circles put around residences, there will be virtually no space for growth in the livestock sector. Indeed, we should ask the question, is this the beginning of the end for animal agriculture in Ontario? And I'll show you some maps in a little bit of time that will drive that home a little bit further. So those four releases spoke to the impact on agriculture, but I also think there are many, many other implications that, to be honest, no one has given much thought to. And I released the one on the left-hand side. I wonder if MTO, and this would apply to your county roads, your township roads as well, the MTO has given thought to the PPS proposed severance policy for ag areas. For example, given two sides of a provincial highway, and you could have as many as 15 new entrance permits on each side of that highway, assuming there is 5 parcels there on each side. That would be 30 requests for new entrance permits for a concession block, along with probably an existing 10 or more. You could be looking at 40 entrance permits being granted per mile and a quarter. Well, you folks know better than I what that means for things like speed limits, what that means for things like getting large equipment around mailboxes, and so on and so forth. And finally, released another tweet just about the impact in aggregates. I don't think that's been given a lot of thought. Again, we see how difficult it can be to establish a new livestock facility. We can equally appreciate how difficult it is to establish a new pit or quarry. And I'm sure council has sat around the table and debated some of those applications. Imagine the potential for the sterilization of the resource and establishing that in the midst of up to 90 new residences per concession block. And that 90 is the 30 severances at 3 units per severance. And again, you see the possible or the potential implications that I think need to be thought about really carefully. You know, as well as I, the changes in agriculture over the last couple of generations, and I've just captured a few photos here from Huron County, actually, hog production, turkey production, large grain drying facilities. Agriculture, in many ways, as you folks know, is an industrial activity. It's large in many ways. It's expensive. It's capital intensive, and so on. And they've also captured a photo in the top left of just new technologies that continue to evolve the use of drones. And again, all of these activities potentially happening in the midst of large residential concentrations as we move forward. So I just think it's really important to think of all of those aspects and what it might mean in your municipality. So I spend a lot of my academic career thinking about the future of agriculture, looking at trends over time, and we look to the past, and we look to the present, and throughout my career, throughout my life, essentially, there has been an increasing level of productivity in Ontario agriculture. As we look to the future, the question is, what does that look like? There are reasons to think it may get more productive, better use of soils, larger concentrations, and better husbandry, and so on and so forth. But there are other things that pose questions like climate change and energy and water use that raise some serious questions about what the future might look like. What I never would have thought of in my career is that our provincial land use policy could be such a threat to the future of agriculture in Ontario. And again, I feel that strongly. So this particular slide is a bit of humor, but again, notice this property is a farm. Farms have animals. Animals make funny sounds, smell bad, and have sex outdoors. Unless you can tolerate noise, odor, and outdoor sex, don't buy property next to a farm. While this may seem funny on one hand, I'm concerned about the voice, the agricultural voice being lost in this debate over time, particularly as you introduce many, many people that do not have an interest in agriculture potentially into community, and what that means in terms of protecting the interests of agriculture and making sure that people understand that agriculture comes with certain realities that aren't always so pleasant to live beside. So my interest in this, in terms of particularly looking at severance activity, spans many decades. I initially did research going back to the early well, we've done 3 phases of research, one at the end of the 1990s, one at the end of the 2000s, and we're just in the process of completing some research looking at the 2010s, this current decade, or this most recent decade. So this captures what's happened in Ontario between 1990 and 2010. The red line is retirement lot severances. And people will recall that once upon a time, prior to 2005 and a change in provincial policy, retirement lot severances were permitted in Ontario. And you can see there's a gradual reduction in trends over time. But in the year 2005, the government said, no, we're no longer going to allow this kind of severance to occur. So it dropped off essentially to zero. And surplus dwelling severances, and I suspect they're probably currently permitted in North Wellington. They are in most of rural Ontario. Continued, and they continue through to the present, a relatively, pretty constant line reflecting the changes in agriculture and so on. However, what we ended up with is essentially at the current policy, just allowing retirement lot severances in terms of residential development. We can also look to two other kinds of severances that were permitted historically. In this instance, the blue line is farm help lots, and those types of severances, again, were permitted under provincial policy until 2005. They had gradually dropped off in the prior decade. So when the province eliminated those, that was not much of an issue. And infill severances, which is to say you've got an existing lot here, an existing lot here, and you can put a severed lot in between them. Those were permitted again up till 2005 and eliminated. So that's his background, but what does that mean in reality and in practice? So what we did, and again in 2010, 2011, we looked at our data from the previous 20 years and we said, well, what does this mean per 1,000 acres per concession block? And most of you will resonate with that, I'm sure. What does this mean per concession block? And you can see that the ratios varied across the province. And we can look at Wellington there, the ratio of 1.14 severances per 1,000 acres over a 20-year time period, right? So on average, over 20 years, almost every concession block would have one additional residential lot having been created from a surplus dwelling or something of that nature. But we can also look at two other examples. I'll point out to you Prince Edward County with a ratio of 7.55, nearly 8 new severances per 1,000 acres of prime farmland. And we can look at Perth County at the very opposite extreme of 0.08. So in Perth County, at the end of 2 decades, things remain virtually unchanged for you as a farmer in terms of potential restrictions, the limitations that might come from new residential neighbors. Whereas in Prince Edward County, and Essex not too different from that, in Prince Edward County, you have nearly 8 new neighbors per 1,000 acres per concession block. So again, I asked the question, what does that mean? And that's what it means looking at this particular slide. So what we know is that when you go to establish a new hog operation of roughly 2,000 feeder hogs, you need a separation distance of approximately 552 meters, right? So each of those residences creates a buffer around it within which farmers are restricted from what they can do. In Perth County, the implication of that over a 20-year time period was virtually no change. It's just that little sliver of blue that received additional restrictions on average. In fact, I think the math is such that you need 20,000 acres for one residential severance in Perth County over that period of time. Whereas in Prince Edward County, the restrictions are pretty significant. That changed over that 20-year time period in terms of farmers' ability to deal with MDS, and in fact, changed from one form of production into livestock. Again, just to emphasize, it's not just livestock that is of concern to me, but certainly it is a major concern. So what does this look like when we now apply the new provincial standards as proposed? This is the restrictions that would create each of those new circles is a new house, creating a new buffer around it from within which farmers would be restricted if they went to establish a 2,000 feeder hog barn. If they went to establish a 4,000 feeder hog barn, the distance increases from 552 meters to 700 meters, which would be virtually the entire concession block. Even trying to locate something in the dead center of that concession block would be, in my view, in contravention of MDS for sure. I had a reporter say to me, so the issue then is with MDS. And I said, no, the issue is not with MDS. MDS is the tool by which we, as in your case, as municipal councillors, you try to make sure that agriculture and livestock production get along with existing residences. They're far enough apart that someone's not living with the odors in an incredibly intense way that would exist from a livestock operation. The issue isn't MDS in my view. It's in fact those severances that would put 30 new residential lots in that concession block. as a farmer, it's not only though, of course, what's in your concession block, it's what's across the road, which increases the impact as well. So those are, in my view, considerations that we should all be thinking about. We did a presentation last week along with Pam Dusling, the Director of Planning for the County of Brant. These are the numbers that municipalities provided us. These are potential new residential lots created on agricultural lands. So in Huron County, the policy, if put into effect, would allow an estimated nearly 25,000 residential lots. In Wellington County, at 12,000, and you can see the range that is included there throughout. And of course, that varies based on the size of the county. It varies based on the number of agricultural parcels as we would estimate there to be there. But this is a pretty good indication. And the methodology for each of these is going to be a little bit different. But whether you're at the low of 7,700 for the relatively small county of Brant, or you're at the high of 25,000 for the relatively large geography of Huron County, you can see the impact is really quite stunning. And we'll see some maps in just a second from Middlesex County that portray this as well. So thanks to Middlesex County, they've put together some maps and some diagrams to help folks understand what they felt the impact would be. This is Middlesex showing 2 farm parcels. I assume the one on the right is probably a 50-acre parcel, the one on the left probably a 150-acre parcel or thereabouts. And you can see there were 2 existing lots, these areas outlined here, that were created historically. This would be the impact of creating 3 new parcels, 3 new lots for residential purposes on these 2 parcels. So that's 2 properties. Here's what it would look like in a concession block based on their estimates. And you can see, and I think they're being pretty generous, assuming that these would be clustered together, which reduces the impact. I can see Farmer A being asked, would he consider selling this parcel back here in the side road because there's a bush behind it, as an example. So I would think there's no policy direction from the province saying that they have to be clustered. So that would be what it would look like in a concession block, a sample concession block for Middlesex County. And I think this next slide is stunning. These are the parcels that Middlesex County has identified as being eligible for severances. There's probably roughly 7,000 parcels there, identified by all of those red dots. And for each of those parcels, there could be up to 3, or there could be 3 lots created, which gets you to the number of 21,000, which they identified. Again, for those of you on council who might farm or come from a farm background or simply work with the agricultural sector, you can, I mean, just imagine what that would mean for you in your livelihood and your ability to produce in the way that today, and we've had severances occur historically in Huron and Wellington and Waterloo to a degree, but absolutely nothing that approaches this in terms of its potential impact. So I'm nearing the end of my presentation, but I think there's a whole bunch of other issues that haven't been talked about a lot. And I just think it behooves all of us to think about these things, and in particular, the province. What does this mean, and what would be the implications on aggregate extraction? What would it mean on water availability and safety? What would it mean for natural heritage? And we don't have the details yet from the province and what they're proposing in the PPS for natural heritage. What would it mean for small towns and villages? And I think that's there's a real irony here, that in North Wellington, for example, you'll have encouraged development in Mount Forest and Arthur and other small villages and hamlets. And I wonder, what does it mean to be a developer in those communities now who might come forth and think, I'm going to create a new subdivision for 30 lots, which historically would have been looked at really positively, when I suddenly realized that the farm parcels surrounding those communities have the eligibility opportunity, if this is approved, for 3 severances each. And I just think that it will fundamentally impact even the development of our small towns and villages where we've invested for generations in the infrastructure to accommodate development there. We had an interesting presentation on school boards schools just prior to mine. What does it mean for school board planning? I mean, we've gone through a process of trying to figure out what schools look like in this province for many decades. What does it mean with the unpredictability of this potentially? And for you folks, of course, servicing from snow plows to water to emergency services and so on. What does it mean? And I think, I haven't included anything about taxes here or farmland values, what it might mean. And I think there's significant other things that can be thought about as well. So with that, I just want to offer one concluding comment before I entertain any questions that folks might have. And I want to go back to my friend, the big burly stereotypical farmer. And if he was to walk into your council chambers now, what would he be saying to you? And I think there's probably 4 messages we would hear from him. The first, he would let us know that he's mad as you know what about what's going on. Secondly, I think he would say he views this as an attack on agriculture. Third, I think he would tell us that rural and agriculture will change and it'll never be the same in our communities. And the fourth thing, I think he would stand up and he would pound the table and he would say, this is a bad plan. What are you folks thinking? So with that, I'd like to say, I went through that really quickly, Mr. Mayor, just in the interest of time, but I would be happy to have any questions if there are any. And I will also look to council because council will also have their own experience with these issues and topics as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just say thanks for listening.
Thank you, Wayne, for your presentation. First, I'll throw it open to members of council if they have any questions or comments with regard to your presentation. Councilor McCabe.
Thanks, Dr. Codwell, and through you, Mayor. I sat in on your presentation last Wednesday and was a little bit more thorough than this, but thanks again for coming to our township to get this out in the public's mind as well, because it scares the hell out of me. And it's not just Wellington County that's, you know, losing 1,000 acres. It's all across Ontario, and this is one of the topics that we sit and talk about at the Rural Ontario Municipal Association as well. And like yourself, have talked to a bunch of reporters about this, and the short-sightedness of this is just astounding to me, not only for all the reasons that you've mentioned, but our own food security here in Ontario. We're already going to have to rely on food from outside of Ontario. And with something like this coming in to prime ag across central, southwestern, and south Ontario, and even off to northeastern Ontario, like how do we manage that part of the situation?
Yeah, it is absolutely, it's a very fine point, and it challenges us all to think through how best to approach this. There's a slide I've not talked about in any of my presentations that I often like to use, and it looks to climate change in the future. And it does forecast for climate change out to the year 2080. And it predicts the changing productivity that will happen globally. We happen to live in an area that will have the good fortune expected to see some important increases in productivity. But if you look at the maps that have been prepared globally, virtually all of southern part of the US, virtually all of South America, virtually all of the African continent, virtually all of Southeast Asia, virtually all of Australia, and we're seeing it already, will lose significant amounts of productivity. And we have the good fortune of living in an area that will see forecasts of increase in productivity as a result of climate change. Do we not have a responsibility, not only to ourselves, but other citizens of this planet, to protect this important resource that we have? And I might sound like I'm on a soapbox when I say that, but I just think it's another reality that speaks to food security, as you're suggesting, that's not been given a lot of consideration. So it's right on with that, Councillor. Okay.
Councillor McCabe, did you have another one?
Yeah, just to, and on that, Dr. Codwell, I would encourage anyone that does listen to these council meetings to get a hold of our rural MPPs across Ontario, and in particular the Minister of Agriculture, who for the area of Huron Bruce, and you don't hear her talking much about farm and agriculture and the I guess the land grab that this could potentially is probably going to come to pass.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, you think of all of us who do work in the public, you know, we think about our legacy. I'm sure your council thinks about what have we done and how will the next generation benefit from the decisions you're making today. And I would like to think for those of us who are immersed in this issue, there's a side of the equation where people are you know, putting this policy into a place. And I just think that the legacy of this, if it comes to pass in a generation, people will just like, what were they thinking? Right. That'll be the legacy that folks promoting this will have.
Any questions, comments? Councillor Hearn?
I have so many comments and it's kind of difficult to contain it. My first comment is I haven't had a lot of sleep since the beginning of April. I remember the day I got the call that this came out. I was on my way home from the Dairy Expo in London and my phone kept going off and I had to pull over. And I mean, from a lot of levels, I feel like I'm not even wanted here anymore. And I don't know where my family belongs. My family has beef cattle in Huron County and I'm here with sheep, and livestock isn't really wanted anymore. So neither is my family. So I've got that going on. I don't think it's appropriate for Wellington County. We have a lot of industries, not only, the livestock sector. Right across the road, we have a feed mill. I mean, he produces feed. So where does he go? A question, I guess, a few questions. The surplus dwellings, we just did one in the public meeting, Dr. Caldwell, that restricts development on the retained parcel. What happens there? That's now fair game, right?
That would generally be my reading of it. There's a couple of nuances to that. First, there's so many questions that the province hasn't answered in what they've released. It does speak to parcels that existed on the date of like February or January 1, 2023 as being parcels that are eligible. So certainly any of those that were created before January 1st, in my view, are going to be eligible. Even the parcels where the restrictions put into effect. What will occur now, I think, with surplus dwellings, what someone would do is, if they think about it, is they would apply for the severances, the 3 severances first, then they would apply to do the surplus dwelling, just to eliminate the possible risk that they sever off the dwelling and that the remainder remains stagnant. People will find a way around it. So yeah, I share that concern, Councillor Hearn.
I'll just ask maybe another one, and then I'll let someone else take over. How much livestock do you think will be left in 2051 if you had just in your professional opinion?
It's difficult to predict, but I think it would be virtually zero. And there's a reason why I say that. I think the challenge with establishing that number of residences, and again, I'm painting it to a degree the worst case scenario, right? And that's what the policy leads us to do. It's the policy is saying that this can occur. So there will be areas of the province where the worst case scenario happens relatively quickly. There will be other parts of the province where it takes longer to occur because of the amount of demand that might be there. But my sense would be 2 or 3 things will happen. A quality barn that's there today will remain in production for a period of time, right? It will, somebody's invested in a dairy facility, and that barn will limit things around it to a degree for a period of time. As I look out my window here, I see a barn there, and a barn there. They're older style bank barns. When people have a choice to make between retaining those older style bank barns and demolishing them, they'll demolish them. If they want a severance, they'll demolish the barn in the interest of the severance occurring. So I think those will be lost to the countryside, which will, of course, free up more land. People will do it on their own property, or they'll ask their neighbor to consider doing it, or who knows how they arrange things with the neighbor. The other thing that I think will occur, if we look at most modern livestock facilities, and I've heard it said that for hog barns, for example, they tend to have a 20 to 30 year time period, right? That they, and you can do renovations and keep them in production for a longer period of time. But I think, again, what will occur over time, it'll be 20 years from now, and Sally and Fred will sit down and they'll think about the barn that's located in their property and say, do we spend the money to rehabilitate that barn and keep it in production, or do we demolish it and go the route of growing severances? And I think that those kinds of decisions will get made over time by people simply because it's the easy thing to do. And that, again, will push people out of production. So when you ask me 50 years from now, I think we're looking at the potential loss of most of the livestock production in this province. Now, there will be there'll be exceptions to that, but the trail that we've been on for the last 50 years is larger, more intensive, better husbandry, all of those kinds of things. I just think there won't be the space.
Councillor McCabe, did you have another one?
Yeah, just kind of came to mind, and thank you again for indulging your time with us here tonight, Dr. Caldwell. In chatting to municipalities across Ontario and some of the counties, there's I have heard some people saying that some of the county planners are being told, well, you know what, this is going to be good for farm families so they can have their kids grow up on the same farm. Like, surely to God, that's not the intent that the province is pushing, because I would argue that with anyone that it's, again, short-sighted.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back at those historic severances that permitted severances for sons or daughters and see how few of them there really were. And that speaks to me for limited, happening in a limited way in reality. And we've done work, for example, looking at retirement lot severances historically. And on average, they would stay in the ownership of the original retiring farmer for less than 5 years. And then they would be converted to someone else's ownership. I was at a meeting today where someone from Niagara said that in the region, they had somebody retire 7 times, right? Each time getting a new severance. And that's the kind of abuse that potentially invites. So there will be a few people that take advantage of it. We do have, that notion of allowing 2 additional accessory dwelling units accommodates much of that family need, I believe, without creating the opportunity for severance. Plus, most farmers have access to more than one parcel. If they want to build a second dwelling, the logical thing, the smart thing to do would be to put that dwelling on a separate parcel and not put it on the home property. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think that if there are some of those out there, there sure isn't 150,000 of them. And they could be, we could find a way of, if that was the single mandate to be accomplished, smart people could figure out a way of doing it that wouldn't jeopardize the industry.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Burke?
Yeah, I just have a comment, Mayor Lennox. I don't really disagree with anything that's been said here this evening. And I guess we just need to make sure that folks that are maybe watching this council meeting or attending it now, reach out and get their comments in before the deadline to voice their dismay of the policy that's now being put in place before the original growth policy was even completed. So I think a pivot again by Queen's Park it just shows a real lack of confidence in their policy making. And I want to make sure that we also get our comments in, and I trust that'll either come from us or from the county. Are we putting comments in for the deadline?
I think the intent is both.
Okay. I think that's probably a good idea, just because the more response that's put in, I mean, more voices, I guess. But yeah, I'm quite concerned about this. We've talked about biosafety, food security, and just the lack of the fact that it's going to change the agricultural sector on all kinds of levels is very concerning, especially for our area and other larger communities that have agriculture.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just to echo Councillor Burke's comments, I think those are very fine comments. I want to just reflect, I had a chance to present to Dufferin County Council, and I was quite impressed by their discussion that followed this. And yes, they were going to send into the registry. They were also going to send letters to the MPPs because I would share a concern that, as part of the registry, that's really very much an administrative process, right? You receive comments, you reflect on them, you share those back with the government. Whereas I see reaching out to your MPPs as part of a political process, and I would sense that this is a political action that's being taken by the government, and they need to hear it with that lens brought to it, I think. So.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I know you had a list there of, the other impacts. I've got a few more that I could add for you. That I've been hearing about, excuse me, in Wellington County, particularly in the southern end of Wellington County, there's a lot more severance activity has happened over time. And now septage is getting to be a challenge. A lot of those property owners, the people who pump their septic tanks as routine maintenance, are struggling to find places to take that septage and have it processed. And guess where it ends up? It ends up in our municipal wastewater treatment facilities across the communities, and there's less, and as pressure mounts on those, there will be less and less appetite to take that septage. Certainly, it should be on our radar as municipal plant operators. You did talk about the roads infrastructure, and all the things, and I'm sure that all those residents who move into our communities would expect different standards of roads than what we our rural residents already accept. And the other part of it I would add too is that the MDS calculation to create a severance is one part of the calculation, but the MDS2 calculation, which controls what farmers can do adjacent to residential things, when we get to a cluster of 4 or more residences, the distance is double. So the chances of locating near those are even more remote. But the most worrying part from my perspective is really the economic result. So if I can use just a quick example, if I had a $2 million farm and I can sever 3 lots on it, and recently in our area, a residential lot in the rural area has been selling for about $500,000. That farm now becomes worth $3.5 million instead of $2 million. And so even though it may be possible, theoretically possible, to establish a new livestock operation on that property, there is no way that the livestock operation can afford that $1.5 million premium to buy that farm to set it up with agriculture, because they won't be able to allow those severances. So you talk about the gradual hollowing out of the livestock industry. Well, this will put a stop to any further development, literally overnight, just because the economic realities will stop it completely. So the other argument that I hear about this as well, not all farmers are going to use it. Well, I don't use this provision, but that's not the issue. It's going to be factored into the value of those farms immediately. As we've seen with surplus farm dwellings, the value of those farms with viable surplus residences on it are higher than other bare parcels, because that value is factored into the sale price. And that sale price is going to just completely drive out any investment in the livestock industry in certainly in the urban fringe area of Wellington, like Wellington County, where there's immense housing pressure. And I guess, Councillor Hearn mentioned it too, but, we not only should we talk about the farm impacts, but we should talk about the broader economic impacts too, because there are input suppliers and further processing that exists in our communities, that if the livestock sector isn't there, those businesses will not exist either. I know when I first started talking about this issue, I kind of did so tongue in cheek, that that I wouldn't have been so upset about this policy if the province at the same time indicated they were going to allow 3 residential severances off of every industrial lot, because all the same land use conflict issues exist. Noise, dust, traffic, all those things exist with farms. Plus farms, we also have odor and sometimes even insects to deal with in terms of land use conflicts. And here we are talking about putting people into those type of conflict situations. So I don't think the province would even consider severances off of industrial land. So why are we talking about it here? It just doesn't make sense to me. This is a huge resource that we need to be preserving for its best and highest use, which I believe is agriculture. Anyway, sorry, I'm up on my soapbox a little bit now.
I completely agree.
In terms of the political thing, I'm also the warden of Wellington County, and we are pursuing meetings with our local MPPs on this topic later this week, as well as I'm working with the Western Wardens Caucus, which I think you may be involved with a little bit as well, trying to get some face time in front of the key decision makers in Queen's Park. So thank you for all you're doing on this topic. We need articulate advocates like yourself to tell the story, and certainly appreciate the effort you're putting into it.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here with you folks tonight, and good luck with your own endeavors trying to influence this, whatever we want to call it. So this initiative on the part of the province, I'm being polite there. So
yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay. Again, Wayne, thanks for your time, and we appreciate
pleasure.
Your input.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So next up, we have another presentation talking about planning. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Does someone have the presentation? Yeah. I think, thank you for having me here this evening. Wayne's a tough act to follow. So I'll touch on some of the things that Wayne's talked about. And so shall I just nod at you, Karen, or? Oh, sure.
Yeah, just let me know, this is PDF, not a.
Yep. Yep. All right, well, why don't I just step into it then? This presentation will touch on the proposed provincial planning statement. I will skip over some content where there's duplication with what Wayne's been talking about. And then a bit about official plan amendment 119, which was approved by the province with modifications. So stepping into the proposed PPS. There's so much happening with this document. It's hard to really hone it down. So I've chosen 3 areas here that I thought would be the most relevant. So stepping in with agricultural impacts. Next slide. Okay. And you can, next one. So in terms of agricultural impact, as Wayne has said, there's considerably more potential for rural residential growth in our prime and secondary agricultural areas. And sorry, that's cutting off at the bottom. Yeah, and less protection of agricultural resources. And on to the next one. So for prime agricultural areas, Wayne talked about the severances, and I have the criteria here just to briefly touch on that. And as he said, it's a requirement that we allow for these severances. So I think the province knew that not everybody would agree with this in building the policy that way. That's not the way all of the policies are written in this document. So minimum distance separation. I think a key issue related to that, of course, we've got MDS 1 and MDS 2. That can be varied through minor variance, which I'm sure you've dealt with as a committee of adjustment. But now those can no longer be appealed by property owners. So I think I guess it creates a difficult position for a farmer. And if they question the calculations themselves or something along those lines, there's no real recourse. On the flip side, I suppose it would allow for a farmer that wanted to expand a livestock operation to seek that kind of relief. And I suspect most councils would be sympathetic to that. Doesn't take away the conflict though, but I just thought I would mention that. Size and servicing, I totally agree with the mayor's comments about servicing. There is a policy in the existing provincial policy document that requires reserve capacity for treatment for individual septic. And that hasn't really been a big issue because we haven't had potential for many lots. But now when we're looking at the kind of volume, I think that issue needs to be investigated more, like how severances still they'll have conditions of approval. And if you can't satisfy a condition of approval, it fails. So I think that's an area that needs to be looked at further, because if there isn't enough capacity in our municipal sewage treatment plants, and there's nowhere else for it to go, then that is a technical issue. So I'd kind of be curious to see what we can do with that. Same thing with access. If you can't achieve safe access, then a severance would fail on that, even if it's approved conditionally. So I don't know, anyone that's had some experience with MTO knows that they're pretty firm and unwielding when it comes to access when they don't want it. So I'm not trying to say that this isn't a huge impact and a problem, but I'm hoping that there are some areas where there will be some controls. The other criteria that are interesting too are that it needs to be adjacent to an existing non-agricultural land use or lower priority agricultural lands. And, they say the devil's in the details. In this document, the devil's also in the definitions. So there are no definitions for these terms. And I think, certainly our comments, the county's comments and others have, of course, pointed this out. I think if those terms aren't defined, then it definitely makes it near impossible for us to really implement the criteria. It makes them not very effective. A non-agricultural land use, somebody could say could be, trees, a natural feature or something like that. And then lower priority agricultural lands, if it's not the Canada Land Inventory mapping, what is it, and who knows what kind of submissions we would get to try to demonstrate that without the benefit of a definition. Of course, Wayne talked about the permission for 2 additional residential units. That's something that the official plan already allows for. So I think that's a positive thing that they've entrenched it and made it more clear. But again, that creates more servicing demands in the rural area. We also, in our comments, pointed out some concerns about, I guess the positive for new non-agricultural uses in prime agricultural areas is the requirement for an agricultural impact assessment, but at the same time, removal of alternative location tests. So that's an important test that we would have been applying for settlement boundary expansions as part of the municipal comprehensive review, and it takes that away. So then moving on to the next slide, I wanted to provide a township lens here. So what does this mean for you? Looking at the technical work that was just completed through our process, working with Watson and Associates, your forecast for the rural area for the next 30 years is 230 households. That's on average about 7 units per year. And that, clearly would be exceeded even with conservative estimates for severance activity, particularly as you've noted, if it's baked into the value of the land, it almost becomes something that a future owner would be required to undertake to get the value back in the property. So it really turns the growth strategy kind of upside down. So the county growth strategy and this flows from provincial policy is the hierarchy of serviced urban centers, hamlets, secondary agricultural area. Prime isn't in there for obvious reasons. We prohibit residential lot creation except for surplus farm dwellings. So what does that mean for hamlets? Right now, we limit them to 5 lots expansion, but I think it would be difficult to argue that you couldn't do more when you can already do 3 on a prime egg farm lot. So, but that would be where we would normally want to see the growth go. I think the provincial government's answer to that would be do both. So moving on to the next slide, I wanted to focus a little bit on urban growth management for a moment. So the new provincial planning statement combines the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. It streamlines and simplifies the approach to growth management. And in a lot of ways, those are good changes. Some of them are good changes, others, I'm not so sure, but the requirement for a municipal comprehensive review is removed. Not much is carried over from the growth plan. Gone are the intensification and density targets for our area, but also the requirement to identify excess lands. In short, it's easier to expand and also identify new settlement areas, which was prohibited under the current rules. And that wouldn't be done through that kind of a comprehensive planning process necessarily. They could be applied for by private landowners at any time. So I think that the pressures that you're going to be experiencing will be greater than they have been in the past. And then next slide, what this means for you. As I'm sure you recall from our very recent land needs assessment technical work, there was no need for urban expansion through the results of the technical work. You had a need for 80 hectares of existing future development land to be brought into the development pipeline. And then you had a surplus of 132 hectares of existing urban lands that would have been required to be delineated as excess lands that wouldn't be developed until the next comprehensive review or until 2051. So what the new policy document does is it treats the land needs as a minimum, and that excess land identification is no longer required. So I think that puts you as a township in a position of making some decisions around that, around what you want to do with all of your future development land. We do have a meeting tomorrow. It really is tomorrow. It's a short week. So we're starting that conversation, you know, we're totally prepared to work with you on that. And doesn't mean the future development designation has to disappear. I think we still need to meet technical requirements, and I think that's kind of what it keeps coming back to for me is you still need to have surfacing. It still needs to be phased and staged and planned properly. So the next slide. If you're like me, you might have been thinking, as I did about some of my own work, you had that great work done on your community growth plan. Was that wasted effort? And to that, I would say absolutely not. I think you've been very proactive as a council and as staff, and there are still good principles that you can follow within that document. And I would, you know, emphasize the fact that intensification is still encouraged by the new provincial planning statement. And so that means that we can still have good policies around that. They won't be as strong, but I think we've made great strides as a county and yourselves as a municipality toward doing more of that. And also we want to continue moving forward with some mixed use policies as well. So then on to affordable housing. This is an important area, affordable and attainable housing. The new document removes requirements for targets for affordable market-based housing, so and rental housing. And that does make it difficult because it means, well, and they've removed the definition as well. So it takes away the tools that we would have to monitor, measure, and report and understand what's happening. Doesn't mean that we can't do it and that we won't do it, but we're kind of on our own. So it's kind of like downloading it a little bit more. And the province went one additional further step. They broadened the definition of housing options, which is great. I mean, it's a huge raft of options, including spelling out farm housing, farm help, and that sort of thing. But they removed affordable housing as one of those options. So I'm kind of confused by that, to say the least. So that ends, puts a hard stop on the presentation around the new policy document. Next, we're moving into the official plan amendment 119 and the province's approval of that. You've probably seen some of that in the advertiser. And just as a reminder, that amendment was to establish the county growth structure that met the growth plan. That was our first amendment, and it actually was with the province for 10 months. So you're forgiven if you don't quite, if it's a bit fuzzy in your mind, because they suspended their approval timeline, and they extended it. And I think now we understand why. They've issued their approval with modifications, and their decision is final. Thank you. I'm like, next slide. Thank you. So there were several. Oh. A lot of there were minor modifications that we totally agreed with and supported. But then on the flip side, there were major mapping modifications to expand urban boundaries in the order of over 1,000 acres, primarily in Center Wellington, but also in Rockwood and Clifford. Importantly for you, there were employment area conversions, one in Arthur and one in Elora. So I think you'll all be quite familiar with this site. So the employment area conversion request was approved. And so that landowner put in a request through official plan amendment 119. I should note that that amendment didn't include urban boundary expansions. It didn't include employment conversions. That's part of our phase 3 work, but in any event, that's how the province chose to proceed. So what that means for this particular property is that, and the way that the schedules are structured, it's been taken out of that employment category, so they don't need the conversion anymore, but they still need to redesignate the land. So the province didn't do the local piece, which would be doing the official plan amendment and putting the appropriate land use designations on the property. So that would still be a requirement. And then I'm going to move into next steps. So for the proposed PPS, I think we're all familiar with the deadline. Final version is expected in the fall. So I'm thinking September. And then of course the challenge of interpretation and implementation will follow. I mean, we're already looking at it now. We're meeting with our friends in the county planning directors. There are a bunch of geeky planning organizations that we're all part of, and we all talk and have email blasts all the time. It's fabulous. So, you know, we're definitely talking to our peers and counterparts elsewhere. And then for the official plan review, we'll have a status update report coming to Planning Committee next month. But I did want to, again, have the township lens for you. We have a high priority on getting the official plan amendment through for the future development redesignations in Arthur and Mount Forest. And it will be important and even more important for the township to give considerations to municipal servicing and phasing of development from the urban lens. And then I guess I couldn't end the presentation without talking about impacts to the county too. Again, it's just such a wholesale change in so many aspects of what we do. It's you know, Lisa, I understand your feelings. I've had a few moments where I felt sick to my stomach and seeing regional governments and the impacts there too, and knowing our peers and are suffering and you know, challenged.
I shouldn't intervene, but I just want to thank you for all that you've done. I mean, you've worked really, really hard. And you know, and as far as like ground truthing the ag system, everything else, you've done all of that work and exceeded what some other municipalities have done. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And, you know, coming back with these 33 amendments, I knew was difficult for you. So anyway, sorry, carry on.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And you know, we keep moving forward. We have to. Pivot is the, you know, the modern word to use these days. Sometimes I feel like I'm spinning in circles, but so we'll keep moving forward. When we launch the official plan review, we launched it as a municipal comprehensive review and a 5-year review. So we're just going to switch into 5-year review mode and we'll keep going. So that's the plan. And we want to keep working closely with you. I feel like we have closer relationships with our member municipalities from some of the work that we've done, and I really value that. And then last but not least, I just wanted to leave you with the thought that these policies represent minimum standards except for the ones that they're making us do. So we can go beyond those minimum standards within reason. So we'll be looking for ways to still do all the good things that we need to do to build complete communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Any questions from council?
That's okay. I understand. I think Wayne got to field all the questions anyway, and that's okay with me.
So can you just talk briefly, Sarah, about the county's submission for the ERO?
Sure. So we've prepared comments, and we've once it goes to council, then we'll send it through the environmental registry. And those comments are on behalf of the county, but we provided them early to every municipality so that you could choose to some will choose to submit those and endorse them as their own comments. Others might want to supplement and add comments to it and endorse it. It's really everybody's a little bit different. So I understand that you know, you've been working together as staff and with Curtis on that aspect of it, and might wish to go a little bit further with that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any final questions? Okay, thanks, Sarah. It looks like you're
Thank
off the
you.
hook.
Hmm?
Looks like you're off the hook.
Wow.
Okay, next item we have on our list here is the adoption of the minutes of the council public meeting. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Where is that one?
Aaron, they can't hear you.
Okay. I don't think I have it on my list here. What is? So can you read the recommendation out, please, Darren?
I just shut that off, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Lennox. So the recommendation in the report is that Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive report DC 2023-22, Bill 97, helping home buyers, protecting tenants act 2023, and draft provincial policy statement. And further that this report be forwarded with any additional comments that council may have on the proposed provincial planning statement and or the provincial policy changes to the province as soon as possible and prior to the June 5th, 2023 deadline for comment.
Okay. Thanks, Darren. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor McCabe. Discussion on that? Councillor Hearn?
Yeah, well, I think there needs to be a lot of discussion around it because it does recommend any additional comments that council may make. So I would gather that you would need those tonight. Correct, Darren?
That's right.
Okay. And I think with regard to commenting, I mean, this just refers to the ERO posting, correct? This letter or this comment. Yeah, so I like in my opinion, anyway, I think it should go much further than that. Again, it should go to the MPP, Minister of Agriculture, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, to support you at the Western Wardens Caucus, I believe. And I believe John Van Hoff should have it, the ag critic, and even Mike Schreiner and maybe others.
Yeah, I would support that for sure. In terms of content, do you have any things that you feel should be included?
Well, I can let other people go ahead first. I have so many things.
Other comments?
I'm fine with that going to the the people that Councillor Hearn just rhymed off. I think the comments in here are pretty decent from what's already in the package. I can add a lot, but probably wouldn't be very well accepted. So I'm pretty good with this sanitized version of it.
Any other? Go ahead.
Well, I agree. I think that it's important that we get our message across. And I think what's been put together here in front of us is, I'm fine with that. And if we send it to all of the folks that Councillor Hearn has suggested and anybody else that will listen, and we think that it's important that they see our comments, I support that as well. I just think this is a really important issue that we need to really get behind because the impacts are very severe.
Councillor McCabe?
Sorry, I'm sure you said it's got to go to Lisa Thompson as well in her office. I wasn't sure if I heard that. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, sorry.
Mr.
Just wanted to make sure. Yeah, no, I just didn't hear her say that, sorry.
Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Mayor Lennox. I was just wondering, not only if we send this, could we try and get all the other municipalities within our county to send something as well on behalf of make sure it's going in en masse? Might make more of an impact than just one going in.
Councillor McCabe?
Just Roma did send one out to all municipalities in all of Ontario. One of a suggestion to put this towards all of their local MPPs as well. So I'm hoping that all the rest of the county of Wellington and all the municipalities in Ontario push back against this as well with something similar to this, Penny or Councillor Rankin. Sorry.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Hearn, go ahead.
Like, I don't think I really have any necessary revisions to letter. I mean, my only comment is it's more from a planning perspective, and I think it, and I don't know how you do this, needs to be a little more emphatic and emphasize the importance of the agricultural system to everyone in Wellington County. And I don't know really how you do that, but like, it does speak to all the points, I think. Again, that's leaving it pretty vague for you, Darren. And I do believe, like, I don't know whether it talked about intensification targets, but I think that those should remain. Like, I think we should be back to the 2020 provincial policy statement. I'm in so strong opposition to the lot severances per farm parcel. Yeah. Sorry, I'm very passionate about it. Like I said, I've lost so much sleep over this. It's horrible.
Councillor Rankin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there any possibility of adding some of the definite points from Dr. Caldwell's presentation with his permission to put it in here to really emphasize the necessity of having our rural area and our agricultural quality remaining?
I think that's a great point, Councillor Rankin.
So did you have something specific in mind, Councillor Rankin? I'm just trying to think about the wordsmithing part of this.
Well, the one thing that just sort of popped up in my mind when Councillor Hearn was talking, was the point that Dr. Caldwell made about the MTO having to approve laneways going into all these different residences. Is that not something that might slow the process down, because they're not very keen on allowing, especially if it's say a provincial road, allowing to have all these accesses onto it? Any other strong points that we can take from his presentation that's not in ours and add to it?
So maybe we could task staff with a quick scan of that to see if there's things that you could add.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Lennox. I think based on the presentations we received and some of the discussion that we've had, we can do some wordsmithing on kind of the agricultural impacts paragraph and try and really nail down some of the main points we talked about tonight and any further discussion we might yet have.
Thanks, Darren. I would add too that, you know, this is the submission to the environmental registry. I think Dr. Caldwell talked about it as well. You know, this is a political issue. And so we need to be taking political action around it as well, which is outside of the more administrative action that we're proposing here. I know at the county, after we had our planning report talk about the details of some of this, I made a request to both of our MPPs for a meeting. On behalf of Wellington County, I would suggest maybe we need to do the same thing with our MPP on behalf of the township as well, and see if we can get a meeting arranged between now and the June 5th timeframe, or if not, then as soon as possible. Because I think this is not just a technical planning issue. This is a much broader issue to our community because agriculture is our #1 industry. And this threatens the future of it. So I would suggest we continue down this path, and I appreciate the comments and you know, staff's willingness to pull it together. But I think we do need to take further action as well and on a more political side of things. Councillor McCabe.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Mayor Lennox, and if we're going to go political side of things, it's no strange idea to anyone, I don't think, in Ontario, that a lot of PC MPPs get their support from rural Ontario. And this is a direct attack on rural Ontario. And like they're eating away, I think, at some of their support, I would suggest, and we've got to take it to them.
So just to throw a fly in the ointment, and I hate to do that, but you know, some farm landowners would think this is a great thing. I mean, if someone at the later stages of their farming career, you know, I used my $2 million farm example, now worth $3.5 million, that extra $1.5 million in the retirement fund is pretty attractive. But what we're talking about here is sterilizing it for future. So yeah, it might be short-term windfall, and there will be people in the community who will want to take advantage of that. But I think it's up to us to try to preserve the long-term future of our farming agricultural industry too. Sherry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, having said that, I think if we're going to sort of add to this, I think the economical impacts and also the food security portion, to make it more on a personal level, and the economic impacts. It's not just, and I use that just as a loose term, but it's about livestock. It's about, you know, the crops, but it's also those spin-off businesses within the rural community as well. So I think, having said that, I sort of support this, I also think that there needs to be a little bit more of a personal aspect in how it touches, not just from a planning perspective, as Penny had mentioned, but on a more personal level. And I think some of those things, such as the food security crisis that we're going through, the biosafety, and how the impact on neighbors and community.
Other questions, comments? Councillor Rankin, then Councillor Hearn.
I was just thinking, when you asked when there were any other points, I was thinking of the diagram in Dr. Caldwell's presentation where the houses were all in circles and they're squeezing out any of the agricultural aspects and possibility of farming for both crops and animal produce. I was just wondering, with that area diminishing, I'm just wondering what to the agricultural college in Guelph, what is the I guess the interest in people taking agriculture and university to try and take over these farms that may be becoming either smaller or non-existent. Is the interest still there with people?
That's an interesting one, and I'll share a personal story that goes kind of along those lines. In that, as many of you know, I have a 16-year-old son who's kind of interested in the farming thing, and I was preparing some of my remarks for the county planning meeting earlier there a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "What are you doing, Dad?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to get my thoughts together for this meeting, and I think this is a really important issue." I said, if the current provincial policy proceeds, and you're interested in farming or, going on to university, we need to move somewhere else, because this is not, there's going to be no future left for you in this industry in our community. I mean, that's the reality that many families will face. Anything else, Lisa? You had something more.
Oh, I don't know that there's much left, but I mean, to speak to Councillor Burke, I mean, the food security issue is huge. We're talking about adding 1.5 million people. This plan seems to be much greater than that. You can fit 1.5 million people on this farmland loss that we could put in a very small footprint. So that's what makes absolutely no sense. But what on earth are they going to eat if we're not here? I've heard some comment from, I don't know, some politicians, to be unnamed, I guess, that this can be done in Northern Ontario. We have a very special soil here and a special climate, and we're close to the urban population, which makes it a very good place to be. And that shouldn't be forgotten about. And we're also close to all of the agricultural innovation. So that's, makes even less sense. The farming here in Wellington County produces, I wish I could remember the stat of how many times our population that we feed. I think each industry is probably 7 to 10 times the population of the county, what we feed here. And Wellington County has a good 10% of the poultry operations, I believe, and a lot of dairy. I love cheese. I don't know that adds a whole lot to your conversation, but the food security thing is difficult. I think we all need to try really, really hard. Once you lose a house to farmland to a house, it's never coming back. These are permanent decisions, and the government cannot take this lightly, and neither can we. And I think that everyone that's listening, or it gets reported on, it needs to be reminded that they need to comment. Their voice should be heard. And if council feels the same way as I do, I think all of us need to comment, but that's not part of this motion that's forward.
Okay, Curtis.
Thanks, Mayor Lennox. So I'm just listening there, thinking about Brooke, Darren, and I tomorrow drawing up a letter to summarize all the good things. And what we're hearing is a lot of genuine, passionate concerns. And that may be something that I'm just fearing tomorrow I might struggle with a little bit to get into our comments, because as was discussed, we'll be commenting on the ERO posting. So I'm wondering, I started pulling together a draft resolution for council to consider. So I'm about maybe 5 minutes away from having something that if maybe that would be something that council then could consider tonight, and that if passed, you can add some stronger language around the residential lot severances is what I'm thinking, and highlight a few of those concerns, and then that could go with our submission to the RO, and that would maybe not just being selfish thinking about what I'd be working on tomorrow, but that would help us capture your concerns.
Okay. I think that'd be great, and certainly we can carry on with business and come back to that if
okay. So maybe I'll try and write neatly so Karen can read it. Can read that, yeah. So, okay, thanks. I'll take a couple minutes.
That'd be great. Thank you, Curtis.
Procedural perspective, staff were directed to arrange a meeting with the MPPs.
Yeah, I think we should. Yes.
And I know you're worried about having that done before June 5th, although the comments have to be in the ERO before June 5th. This could happen after that because they haven't voted on it yet.
Right. Yeah, but the sooner the better, I think. I think there's a sense of urgency around this, and I think that needs to be conveyed as well. Any other questions on the motion before us at the moment? Okay, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So that gets us to, did we deal with the minutes?
You
No?
started to, and then Darren.
Okay. Thank you. Just getting back on track. So a recommendation here that the minutes of the regular meeting of council and public meeting held on May 8th, 2023 be adopted as circulated. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. Any questions or comments on those minutes? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I don't believe we have any business arising from previous meetings, so we're on to items for consideration. Anything anyone would like to pull out for further discussion? Councillor McCabe, go ahead.
I just have 6A. Oh, sorry, thank you. I just 6A.
Parking control.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to look that up.
Any others? Councillor Rankin. Okay.
2B. 4A. And 7B.
7B. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hearn.
Mine was 7B and so Rankin got it.
Okay. Any others? Councillor Burke.
Yeah, I'd like to pull 3A.
Okay. Any others? Anybody?
Bless you.
Okay, so we'll deal with the ones that we haven't pulled, which isn't too many, but we've got a recommendation here that all items listed under items for consideration on the May 15th, 2023 council agenda. So that should be May 23rd. With the exception of those items identified for separate discussion be approved and the recommendations therein be adopted. Could I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor McKay. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So back to 1A. This is in regard to the Mount Forest BIA. A recommendation here that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive the minutes of the Mount Forest Business Improvement Area Association meeting held on May 9th, 2023. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Rankin. Open the floor for discussion. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had 2 points. One had to do with the murals. It says on page 106 or 099 for this report. The code also includes 2 murals, which would be on plywood. I'm just curious if a design for the murals has been chosen yet, if it's something meaningful to Mount Forest.
Through you, Mayor Lennox. So the 6 historical, you're talking about the 6 historical photos?
No, it says 2 murals. It's going into, let me see, I think it's between, is it Wellness and Pizza Hut Laneway?
Okay, so the discussion on that laneway is still being worked on because some of the costs associated with improving that laneway into the municipal parking lot have exceeded the budget. So no mural, I guess, idea or has been chosen as of yet. However, the 6 that will go in between Kindred and Print One They've been working with the archives for some historical photos there. And at this point, the mural design hasn't been chosen for.
Okay, thank you. And the second one, it comes from the business discussed not on the agenda. We have had a delegate attend council to speak about the possibility of Mount Forest having a rainbow crossing. And it says that council would like one of them to be a rainbow crossing. And that is where the council is leaning. I wasn't aware that our discussions here at council had proceeded that far. We haven't had a discussion on the cost of it or taken a vote on it yet.
So thank you through you, Mayor Lennox. This was brought up by our economic development officer. Was more of a feeler to see whether the BIA would be interested in having it in the downtown core. They've been very supportive and let their voice be known that they are still looking for a crosswalk at King and Main. So at this point, it was just a discussion item, and I think that the minutes maybe are not quite accurate on the discussion that was had there. It was, as I say, it was put out just to see whether they would like it in sort of the center of their the area that they represent, and just looking for some additional color there. So that was just a discussion item.
Okay, thank you.
Brooke, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Lennox, I just want to kind of reiterate what Councillor Burke has said. Staff, based on the direction from council to examine options for pedestrian crosswalks and potentially rainbow crosswalks, we're looking at a lot of different possibilities, I guess it would say, and we want to make sure we're talking with all the different stakeholders so we can include those various perspectives in any recommendations that we bring back to council for decision. So we're still working through those options, the costing and potentially locations, and we'll be bringing back a staff report when we have all that information together in a package so that council can make final decisions on all those items.
Thank you. Dale, I saw you popped up there. Did you have something further you wanted to add at this point?
Thank you, Mayor Lennox. No, I think Councillor Burke and Brooke have covered off everything I would have said. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on that report then? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Move on to 2B. This is
We put the manager, Ms. Angrish of the Upper Grand District School Board, sitting in on the meeting in case she pulled her report, which was 7B, and someone has pulled that. I'm wondering if you could
jump it ahead.
them up. And I tried to promote you to a panelist. You'll have to accept a promotion to be able to sit in and answer questions.
Okay, so I'll read the recommendation. We'll get that part going. That the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North received the correspondence dated May 15th, 2023 from Ruchika Angrish, Manager of Planning, Upper Grand District School Board, regarding 2023 Long-Term Accommodation Plan Comprehensive Report. Getting a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor McCabe and Councillor Rankin, thank you. Questions, comments on that one? Councillor Rankin, go ahead.
Thank you. The only comment I have, I thought the report was really well put together and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. But on page 168 of your report and under C, input from board advisory committees, you also mentioned the Student Senate. And I was just very glad to see that the young people, the student themselves, are having a voice in what their future is going to be. That was it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Hearn, go ahead.
More of a question, and I'm not sure sorry, I can't pronounce her name, Rashida, is on here or not.
Yeah, she's just been moved in as a panelist.
And I don't know whether she heard some of the lengthy conversation that we had before, but in the LTAP, there's a lot of population projections and a lot of work been done on this. And if we're going to start developing basically mostly in the rural area, that's going to change a lot of the work. Or at least the result. These projections are going to be way, way off. Has anyone discussed this or looked into this at all?
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Thank you for your question. It's an excellent one. This is something that we at school boards all across Ontario have been struggling and trying to figure out the best way to project. And by the time we get there, there's more provincial policy changes. So what we've been reaching out to our municipal partners and getting information, getting involved through your official plans, getting more. We need more support from your municipal planning staff, basically, trying to figure this out. As you know, heard through all conversations through the policy changes and how it is impacting all municipalities and including school boards. And even though our comprehensive long-term accommodation plan, it is also a fluid document. It's no different than official plans. So next year, based on how the projections come out for demographics and through the official plan reviews, we will go back and revise our enrollment projections. It is definitely impacting our schools, and we have already started to see some of it through additional residential units, which are proposed, which are permitted throughout Ontario. So we only get the numbers after the student shows up at our school. So that's the nature of the reality that we are facing right now, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hearn. Go ahead.
Sorry, one more question, and in relation to that as well, with more of a rural population scattered throughout the countryside, that's going to pose probably significant busing challenges, I would think. Just wondering if I could have your thoughts on that.
Thank you for your question again, and that's absolutely true. So transportation is one of the key things when it comes down to some of the rural schools, and which are not walkable communities, and that's going to continue to grow. Which again, it comes back to funding and the cost resources. But one of the things that through the new draft provincial policy statement that has been released is strengthening the relationships between municipalities and school boards, which was kind of lacking in previous versions, even though it talked about complete communities. So I mean, we are hoping for some more direction from the Ministry of Education in terms of how that is going to work and what better resources will be put into while we provide more housing to incoming population. How do we make that balance? So we're waiting to hear more, as I think everybody else in this room as well. So I think, again, it comes back to collaboration with our municipal partners and figuring things out together.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Rankin, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure if this was answered with Councillor Burke, but in the case of rural townships such as ours, if children have to be assigned to schools outside the attendance area, will that include busing to other towns where accommodation is available? And is there a maximum distance to bus?
Thank you for your question again. If we are talking about, sorry, let me rephrase it, restart it. So if the school is full and we have to put students to another upper grant schools, then yes, busing is provided to those schools. Those schools are considered as holding schools until permanent long-term capacity issues are resolved. While we have heard from Ministry of Education as well through their draft policies that they are looking at, even through the provincial policy statement, that they are looking for other jurisdictions, so outside upper grant district school boards jurisdictions. If there's capacity available, then student will go to other areas. At this time, there have not been any details that have been provided in terms of busing. How will that go between, relationship between other school boards? What does that mean? Will that be a permanent capacity, or will the student be moved back, similar to what an out of area or out of district policy is? So we are waiting to hear more from the Ministry of Education in terms of how the logistics of this will work out.
Any other questions?
Yes, please.
Councillor Rankin, go ahead.
Thank you. On page 205 of the report, it says that lower density housing, including single detached and semi-detached, has yielded a higher number of students than a higher density housing, example, apartments. And I was quite surprised by I thought it would have been reversed, that if you had a denser population, you would be having a higher number of students.
So that's another really good question, and this is something that we closely monitor. When there are apartment buildings, they not necessarily yield the same number of kids that we expect. If there are 50 units, it's not. There's a yield factor that goes into when we do our population projections, and we have noticed that in mostly in apartment buildings, there either very young families or older community that is coming and living in those apartment buildings. So the yield rate is significantly lower, and this is something that we monitor on a yearly basis, just to see that our numbers don't significantly impact what we are projecting for. In terms of singles, because in the last couple of years, there have been changes to provincial policies which allow for basement apartments or other second units on single detached lots, which is especially in last 2 years, we've noticed some of our rural areas and rural schools have much more higher yields coming from single detached homes than multi apartment buildings. So that's where the statement comes from.
Okay. Keep going.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Rankin.
And just out of curiosity, is there a maximum number of portables allowed at a school site before an action is taken, whether they decide to have either an addition or are going to consider building a new school?
So portables work very differently. They are considered as temporary accommodations under Ministry of Education. So number of portables, there's no maximum or minimum that is mandated by the ministry. It is clearly governed by the size of the site, the septic well, or water, electricity, whatever services and utilities constraint, parking, how big the school is, because sometimes the gym or the school library, they are not big enough to cater that number of students. So there's a large number of factors that go into it when we start looking at putting portables on. And then if we know that the population keeps on increasing year after year, and we need to look at a little bit more permanent capacity, that's when business cases for additions or new school sites are explored. Again, this is a very complex system. So the first preference is to put a portable to temporarily accommodate if possible, and then get into looking into more permanent solutions based on the population projections. And similar to your official plans, like we have to start identifying the areas of growth, and based on those areas of growth, we will then be allowed to apply for funding for business cases for additions or new school sites. So the identification will start happening through your official plan reviews. We start to notice where the areas are growing, and that's how we start projecting it for long-term accommodation plans.
Thank you. And for the gifted classes, do they just advance more rapidly, or do they advance at the same level as everybody else but have extra classes included?
Unfortunately, I don't have a direct answer to that. Programming is something not under my belt, but this is something that we can definitely take back and get some answers for you.
I have another one if somebody else wants to jump in, but when I find it.
Okay. I think everybody else is out of questions, so.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. Approximately how long is the process from the time a decision is made that a new school is required until the actual building is built?
That's another excellent question. You're really good questions. Thank you so much for those. Okay, let's put it this way. If through projections, we notice that the growth is constant in some communities and we need a school site, we typically look at either through a plan of subdivision, securing a school site through a developer when they come in for their plan of subdivision. And after registration of those plans, that's a couple years, we really have to apply for business cases to ministry before we purchase the site, and then apply for another business case for funding to go construct the site. So it could be many years before the actual building is constructed. It's a long process because every little step requires Ministry of Education's approval to acquire the site, to get the funding, to build, and then get ministry approvals for even design and construction.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm finished.
Okay. Thank you. So I think we'll deal with the motion then. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And thank you for staying with us for so long to answer those questions.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Okay. So we're back to 2B, right? Okay, so 2B, we have the recommendation that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive for information report DC 2023-21 regarding the final approval of the Crombie Property Holdings Limited Site Plan Control Agreement. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor Hearn. Open that up for discussion. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you. The report seems to be very well prepared, and it was nice to see it. I'm sure everybody will be happy when the project is completed. But I just wanted to have a question for my own information. Can you explain what a daylight triangle is?
Through you, Mayor Lennox. That is at the intersection. That is the sight line across the corner of the property to see oncoming traffic coming down the other street, the perpendicular street.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So in cases of properties like this, where there's major intersections, the township will actually take ownership of that daylighting triangle of that additional property at that intersection. So we can better control that there's no signage and landscaping put in that area.
Oh, thank you very much.
Other questions? Councillor Burke?
Yeah, my question is with regards to the access to the horse and buggy parking structure. It says that it's going to go over land that's owned by the township. And I'm just wondering how that's going to affect the parcels of property or land that we've bought behind existing businesses to make it a more walkable community. I think there was a thought that that might be a walking trail at some point. And I'm just wondering how that's going to impact that future possibility.
Yes, through you, Mayor Lennox. So the properties that we recently purchased from adjacent businesses, those properties will continue the unofficial trail that we've got. They will butt into this land that's used for the horse and buggy trail, and it'll be can be a multi-use property.
Yes, Councillor Rankin?
Thank you, Mayor Lennox. I'm just wondering, with the Mennonite population using that to traverse across it, is there any more encumbrance on us for insurance purposes?
I think I might have to get back to you on that one.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions? Are you happy to proceed waiting for the answer in the future, Councillor Rankin?
I would be, just out of interest, I would be, but.
Okay.
I could take a general crack at it that vehicle, the horse-drawn vehicle traffic is on our roads. So if it's on our private property, they're already using our municipal parking lots within Arthur Mount Forest with tie stall, the hitching rails. We have them here in Kenilworth too.
Right.
So I wouldn't expect it would increase our insurance or liability.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Move on to 3A. In regard to the grants and donations, we have a recommendation here that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive report EDO 2023-12 being a report on the grants and donations community development program. And further, the council approves $24,786.20 in funding from the following sources: $4,500 from the 2023 Community Improvement Program, $2,786.20 from the 2023 Council Miscellaneous Operating Budget, $17,500 to be included in the 2024 budget as council directed projects. Open the floor. Oh, sorry. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor McCabe. Open the floor for questions, comments. Councillor Burke, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not really in favor of going over budget, as I had originally stated on April the 17th. However, I have more of a comment based on some of the discussions we've had here this evening already. And that is, if we support the Kenilworth playground equipment, I'd like to see us have a conversation and open up the dialogue about purchasing that parcel of land that playground equipment would go on, so that the families that live in the homes adjacent to the school have the access to use that equipment and not feel like they're trespassing. As we've heard, after 3:15, you're trespassing if you're using that equipment. So I'd like to see us open up that dialogue if we're going to support that equipment, that maybe we can look at something like that.
Councillor McCabe.
Yeah, and thank you, and through you, Mayor. Just with that, Councillor Burke, I'm not opposed to that idea, but to get to the playground, we'd have to purchase a walkway, I guess, too, because it's not obviously right on the property edge. So that might be a little cumbersome. because the kids would still have to go on the property after 3:15. I'm not in favor of them trespassing, but I'm pretty sure they do already. And I think probably at any school in Wellington North or Ontario for that, well, for the most part, maybe they're already using it after 3:15. And they say they don't enforce it anyways, but it might be something worth looking into for sure, though.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, all those, sorry, did I miss somebody? No, all those in favor? That's carried, thank you. 4A, this is the check register report, recommendation that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive the vendor check register report dated May 15th, 2023. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions or comments. Councillor Rankin, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a question. I was just wondering what Dason Industrial Services supplies.
Okay. Do we have anybody that can answer that one?
What was the name?
Dason, Dayson. There's an amount of 200,000. I just thought. Just.
I was say cleaning supplies, but that's not.
I just thought it was a large amount and I was just curious as to what the amount was for.
I don't, off the top of my head, know that one. I think that may be one we have to get back to you on. The money's already spent, so it's too late to say no.
I think it is actually.
It could be calcium chloride for road treatment.
Yeah, it's full service descaling, road special coating, painting and lining applicators. They do a lot of sandblasting and coating as well.
That's the company. We better wait and get the proper answer to Councillor Rankin. Oh,
I would say it's probably the tower in Mount Forest.
Brooke,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Lennox, I was just going to offer that staff can look into that and get back to council on the exact details of that check.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on that? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. 6A, parking control. We have a recommendation here that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North receive report CLK 2023-15 being a report on parking control, and further the council authorized the mayor and clerk to sign bylaw 6000-23 being a bylaw for parking control in Wellington North, and repeal bylaw 5000-05 in the form substantially attached when set fines and short form wording have been approved by the Ministry of the Interior General. I get a mover and a seconder for that, please. Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Burke. Questions, comments, Councillor McCabe?
Just one question, and through you, Mayor Lennox, thank you. How does this affect the bylaw officer? If there was someone that called in overnight parking in Arthur, Kenilworth, or Mount Forest? Does that
So right now the.
cover this off?
Right now, the OPP enforces our parking bylaw.
Right.
In the winter for overnight parking, some of our public works are authorized to issue parking tickets as well. But if they're parked in a municipal, if they're parked on private property overnight, like I don't know, one of the big stores in town, we don't enforce that. That's private
Okay.
property. And they would have to enforce that on their own.
So if there's like a tractor trailer on one of the municipal roads, like in town, I think that goes through the portal through down to the city of Guelph, where we have the arrangement for, isn't it?
No, essentially with this bylaw, there'd be no change in service
Okay.
as it relates to really the enforcement from the OPP or from bylaw enforcement. And parking of what we might think are inappropriate vehicles on the street would still be enforced by the OPP.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thanks.
So this does facilitate, though, in Center Wellington, they're doing a pilot project, having their bylaw enforcement staff do some parking enforcement as well.
Okay.
They're having particular problems, particularly in Laura. As you can imagine, tourist season and limited parking create a conflict that makes it difficult to manage. So they're doing a pilot project with by law enforcement officers as well, which this new bylaw will enable.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on that one? All those in favor? Oh, sorry.
I've had some discussions on the parking with Darren, and I know that the OPP are responsible for parking infractions, and that parking is probably low on importance compared to their many other duties. And I've had a constituent approach me with a parking concern. When that person was advised that it was an OPP matter rather than a township or bylaw matter, they advised that they had already called the OPP, but the OPP has not responded to their complaint. And according to this report, 18 infractions for 2022 are not very many, in my opinion. And with the increase in developments and people currently happening in the future, will the OPP have any opportunities to look after minor offenses such as parking? And it may seem a very insignificant matter to us or to me, but to those that have the complaint, it may be a real issue. So I'm just wondering how they're going to manage with doing something like parking when they have so many other duties. And they weren't really interested in attending to this person's complaint.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to answer without knowing more of the context of the situation. The OPP does respond to parking infractions on a routine basis. That's part of the things that they do, yeah, among many other things, as you've identified. But I would hesitate to suggest that all situations are created equal. So I'd really like to know more context. I would be happy to take, if you could get the more information about the situation, the timing and so on, I'd be happy to take that to the Police Services Board type of attention.
Thank you.
Councillor McCabe, Dyson, go ahead. Dyson. Go ahead.
Sorry, just gonna say, it was the, excuse me, they are doing the work on the water tower, Dyson. So I imagine it's probably a first payment for work already done. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Any other questions or comments on the parking control? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So Curtis, have you got something prepared for us?
And I had a little bit of some input from staff as well here. Let's find the right one. Okay, so this is, I'll read it out. That council for the Township of Wellington North does not support the proposed provincial planning statement policies, which would take prime farmland out of production by way of allowing for additional residential severances in the prime agricultural area. And further that the introduction of numerous non-farm residential uses will negatively impact agriculture, especially livestock producers and farm families in the community. And further that numerous non-farm residential uses will create conflict, limit farm expansions, increase land values, negatively impact agricultural support businesses, and the delivery of rural municipal services, and further food insecurity. And further that the provincial government not proceed with the proposed residential severance policies and retain the current policies which limit severances in the prime agricultural area.
Can I get a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor McCabe. Thank you, Curtis, for
Thank
drafting
you.
that.
Okay.
Any discussion on that?
Good wordsmithing.
Thank you. No, it was fun. So thanks.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye, aye. Okay, any notice of motion this evening? Not, we'll move on to community group meeting program report. Does anybody have anything they'd like to report on this evening? And still has energy to do so.
I can go second if you want. Go ahead.
I was gonna let you go first. I don't have a whole ton to report, just the Arthur Chamber meeting, just a lot of talk about the July 1st celebrations that they're planning in conjunction with the normal things that happen in Arthur. So like a street type sale off to the side. Again, talks about volunteers. So if anyone wants to help out, I can connect you. So let me know. That's about it.
Anybody? Steve, did
Yep.
you have some?
Sure. There's a rec meeting coming up June 5th. That's our next one. Excuse me, I attended the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority meeting on May 18th. Had on the same day the doctor recruitment for Center Wellington, which is includes a bit of Arthur as well. That was also on May 18th, and had a Roma meeting on May 11th. So all of those reports are going to probably be coming to the next council meeting. And there is a Roma meeting June 7th, 8th, and 9th down in Prince Edward County. Once a year, they go to a different zone. So this year it's down in Prince Edward County. So we're heading down there for that meeting. And on also on June 6th, but at 1 p.m. is the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority's Ag Advisory Committee that I sit on now. So add that to the list. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks. Anybody have anything else they'd like to report on tonight? Okay, we'll move on to bylaws. And we have a recommendation here that bylaw number 35-23 and 36-23 be read a first, second, and third time and enacted. Could I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Burke, seconded by Councillor McCabe. Any questions on those? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We're cultural moment, and thanks to Councillor Burke for volunteering to read that one tonight.
Okay, so the cultural moment for May 23rd celebrates the Royal Canadian Legion Mount Forest Branch 134. The mission of the Royal Canadian Legion is to serve veterans and their families, to promote remembrance, and to serve our communities and our country. There are more than 1,350 branches across Canada. Community involvement includes supporting local veterans and seniors, supporting youth sports and other programs, volunteering to help those in need, and offering a place for your community to gather. Legions are funded through membership dues, renting out halls for events, Legion merchandise, and through donations to the Poppy Trust Fund. In addition, Legions raise a large part of their funding through various fundraising events where members volunteer their time. There are about 250,000 Legion members across Canada. Funds raised through the Mount Forest Legion support our local community and can include outreach and assistance programs to veterans and their families, supporting our essential community services such as our hospital, youth sports, leadership programs, and activities such as the cadets, scouts, guides, and education, supporting seniors as well as families in need, and organizing the annual Remembrance Day ceremony. The Mount Forest Legion relies on the support of many volunteers and is looking for new members and volunteers. Volunteers are needed to hold positions on the executive committee, other committees as sports and entertainment, to help with events held in the rental hall, and at the annual fireworks festival when the Legion provides musical entertainment under the beer tent. The Mount Forest Legion's Fireworks Festival beer tent is their largest fundraiser. The Ladies Auxiliary is a nonprofit organization that operates separately from the Legion and contributes a valuable resource to the Legion, The Mount Forest Ladies Auxiliary provides volunteer as well as financial support to the Legion. They also support programs and activities at the Legion. The Ladies Auxiliary also relies on the support of volunteers and is always looking for new members. This was submitted by Sue Doherty on behalf of the Wellington North Cultural Roundtable. So thank you for that, Sue.
Thanks, Councillor Burke. We'll move on to our confirming bylaw. And the recommendation is that bylaw number 39-23 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Wellington North at its regular meeting held on May 23rd, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time and enacted. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Rankin, seconded by Councillor Hearn. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And there's a bunch of announcements here. I'm not going to go through them all. They're at your agenda with some upcoming meetings. I'm going to move to adjournment, and the recommendation here is that the regular council meeting of May 23rd, 2023 be adjourned at 10:10 p.m. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Councillor Burke. All those in favor? That's carried. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.